In 399 BCE, democratic Athens executed the wisest man in the city. His crime? Asking questions. Socrates had spent his life examining the beliefs his fellow citizens accepted without thought. Beliefs about justice, knowledge, the good life. For one young aristocrat watching his teacher drink hemlock, this wasn't just tragedy, it was a shattering revelation about human nature and politics. If Athens could kill its wisest citizen, something was fundamentally wrong with how people understood reality, knowledge, and justice. Plato's response would become the most ambitious philosophical project in Western thought. Born into privilege and political connections, Plato was expected to enter public life, to take his place amongst Athens' ruling elite. But he had just watched democracy murder philosophy. Instead, Socrates' execution led him to a revolutionary conclusion. Until philosophers rule as kings, or kings become philosophers, cities will never cease from ill. His response to tragedy was to rebuild human understanding from the ground up, to create a systematic philosophy that could guide both individual souls and entire societies toward truth and justice. The scope of his vision encompasses nothing less than the complete architecture of reality. At its foundation lies the theory of forms, the revelation that what we see through our senses is not ultimate truth, but merely shadows of eternal, perfect realities. From this insight flows everything else: how we can distinguish genuine knowledge from mere opinion, how the immortal soul's three competing parts achieve harmony, what justice means for both individual souls and entire political states. His political philosophy blueprints an ideal society ruled by wisdom rather than power or wealth, while his metaphysics of love shows how beauty leads the soul upward toward the form of the good, the source of all truth and reality. This is the architecture Plato constructed from the ruins of Socrates' death. To understand it, we must start at its foundation. Part 1. The problem of reality, beyond the world of appearances. Everything around us is broken. Plato began with this startling observation that would transform philosophy forever. Every beautiful face ages and withers. Every just law gets twisted by corrupt application. Even the most carefully drawn circle in the sand reveals rough, imperfect edges under close examination. The physical world presents us with a universe of approximations, copies, and failures. Yet here lies the puzzle that would drive Plato's entire philosophical revolution. If everything we encounter is flawed and temporary, how do we possess concepts of perfection at all? When we see a beautiful sunset, we recognize its beauty precisely because we somehow grasp what beauty itself means. When we witness an act of courage, we identify it as courageous because we understand courage in its pure form. This recognition points to something extraordinary. Our minds operate with perfect standards that the physical world cannot provide. Plato discovered that our capacity for judgment reveals the inadequacy of material reality. We constantly evaluate things as more or less beautiful, just, or equal, which means we must possess some standard of comparison beyond anything we observe. As he argued in the Phaedo, we must have acquired knowledge of equality before we first saw equal things. The very fact that we can recognize two sticks as approximately equal proves we understand perfect equality itself, something no physical objects can embody. The problem deepens when we consider Heraclitus's profound insight that you cannot step into the same river twice. The physical world exists in constant flux. The water flows differently each moment. The riverbanks erode imperceptibly, and we ourselves change with each passing second. Nothing remains stable. This creates what Plato saw as the fundamental crisis of knowledge. If everything continuously changes, how can we have reliable, stable knowledge about anything? Genuine knowledge requires permanent objects. We cannot truly know something that transforms even as we study it. Yet, our minds clearly possess stable concepts that allow us to navigate this flowing world of appearances. We recognize instances of justice, beauty, and truth, despite their imperfect manifestations in the material realm. This capacity suggests something remarkable. Perfect standards must exist somewhere beyond the changing physical world. Our ability to recognize imperfect copies points inevitably toward perfect originals. We identify a particular action as just because it participates in or imitates justice itself. We call something beautiful because it reflects, however dimly, the form of beauty. As Plato would argue, the soul must have beheld true being to explain how we make these recognitions amidst the chaos of material existence. The inadequacy of the physical world thus becomes the gateway to Plato's most revolutionary insight. If perfect standards exist, and they clearly cannot exist in this realm of change and decay, then where are they? And what are they like? Plato's most revolutionary insight emerged from a profound dissatisfaction with the world around him. Everything we encounter through our senses, beautiful objects, just actions, equal measurements, shares a curious feature. They are imperfect and temporary. A beautiful flower wilts. A just law proves inadequate. Two sticks that appear equal reveal differences under closer examination. Yet somehow, we recognize beauty, justice, and equality across these changing examples. This recognition, Plato realized, points to something beyond the physical world entirely. Beyond our material realm exists what Plato called the realm of forms, a domain of perfect, eternal, unchanging essences that serve as templates for everything in our world. The form of beauty itself, justice itself, equality itself, these are not physical objects, but perfect patterns or archetypes. In the Phaedo, Plato describes that which is beautiful apart from all these beautiful things, and that which is just apart from all just things. These forms solve the fundamental problem of knowledge by providing permanent, perfect objects for the mind to grasp, rather than the shifting, imperfect phenomena of sensory experience. Every physical thing relates to the forms through what Plato called participation or imitation. A beautiful painting participates in the form of beauty. A just action reflects the form of justice. Two equal stones share in the form of equality. Plato's example of two equal sticks illuminates this relationship perfectly. They are equal insofar as they participate in equality itself, yet they remain unequal in countless other respects. Their weight, texture, age, composition. Physical objects are beautiful, just, or equal only derivatively, borrowing these qualities from their relationship to the perfect forms. This leads to Plato's most startling claim. Forms are more real than physical objects. In the Republic, he argues that forms always are and never become, whilst physical things always become and never are. This completely reverses common sense. What seems most real to us, the solid objects we touch and see, actually possesses less reality than what appears abstract. Forms represent true being, permanent and perfect, whilst physical objects exist in a realm of becoming, constantly changing and never achieving perfection. The theory of forms explains both knowledge and reality in one elegant system. The mind's ability to grasp eternal mathematical truths, moral principles, and logical relationships proves the soul's kinship with the eternal realm. In the Meno, when Socrates guides an untutored slave boy to discover geometric theorems through questioning alone, he demonstrates that learning is really recollection, the soul remembering what it already knows from its contact with the forms. This raises the next crucial question. If there are many forms, how are they organized, and what gives them their reality and truth? Plato constructs reality as a vast hierarchy, each level possessing more truth and substance than the one below. At the bottom lie images and reflections, shadows on cave walls, paintings, mirror images. These copies of copies possess the least reality, mere appearances that flicker and fade. Above them stand physical objects, trees, tables, human bodies, which themselves are imperfect copies of something higher. At the summit dwell the eternal forms, perfect patterns that give meaning and reality to everything below. In Republic Book X, Plato illustrates this hierarchy through his famous example of 3 beds. First stands the form of bed itself, the eternal pattern created by God, perfect and unchanging. Below this, the carpenter fashions a physical bed, copying the divine pattern, but creating something material and temporary. Finally, the artist paints a picture of the bed, producing an imitation of an imitation 3 times removed from truth. Each level depends upon the one above, whilst possessing less reality, less permanence, less truth. This ascending structure reveals why philosophers must turn away from the sensible world. Physical objects, however solid they appear, are themselves shadows of eternal realities. The tree in your garden participates in the form of tree, but can never equal its perfection. It grows, withers, dies. The form remains eternal. The just action reflects the form of justice, but falls short of absolute righteousness. Every material thing points beyond itself to its perfect archetype. Yet even the forms themselves exist within a hierarchy. The form of triangle governs all triangular shapes, but the form of the good governs the form of triangle itself. Plato places the good at the absolute apex of reality, declaring in Republic Book VI that it is beyond being in dignity and power, and serves as the cause of knowledge and truth. Without the good, even the eternal forms would lack reality and intelligibility. It gives existence to all other forms, just as the sun gives light and life to the physical world. The allegory of the sun reveals this ultimate relationship. Just as the sun enables physical vision by providing light and enables physical existence by providing life-giving energy, the form of the good enables intellectual vision by providing truth and enables metaphysical existence by providing reality to all other forms. Plato states precisely, the good is to the intelligible realm, and intelligence what the sun is to the visible realm and sight. Without the good illuminating them, forms would remain as invisible as objects in absolute darkness. This metaphysical architecture explains why knowledge is possible at all. The soul can ascend from the world of appearances to grasp eternal truths, because reality itself has this ascending structure, and the soul is naturally oriented toward the good. The philosopher's task involves turning from the world of becoming toward the world of being, climbing the hierarchy of reality until the good itself comes into view. This journey from shadows to light, from ignorance to wisdom, becomes the very definition of philosophical education. Part 2. The nature of knowledge, escaping the cave of ignorance. Plato draws an absolute distinction between episteme, genuine knowledge, and doxa, mere opinion. This isn't academic hairsplitting, but the foundation of his entire philosophical system. In Republic Book V, he declares that knowledge is set over what is, ignorance over what is not, and opinion over what both is and is not. Knowledge concerns the eternal realm of forms and achieves certainty through reason. Opinion concerns the physical world and relies on the unreliable testimony of the senses. What most people confidently call knowledge is actually nothing more than opinion. This distinction reveals a tragic truth about human existence. Most people spend their entire lives mistaking opinion for knowledge, never grasping genuine truth. They are like prisoners who mistake shadows for reality, never questioning whether their perceptions correspond to truth. Plato observes that the masses see many beautiful things but not beauty itself, many just things but not justice itself. They encounter countless particular instances, but never grasp the universal forms that make those instances intelligible. This isn't intellectual snobbery, it's a description of a condition that prevents genuine human flourishing and leads inevitably to moral and political chaos. The senses, which most people trust completely, actually lead us away from truth rather than toward it. They reveal only the changing, imperfect world of appearances, whilst true knowledge requires grasping the eternal, perfect world of forms. In the Phaedo, Plato argues that the soul reasons best when none of these senses troubles it, and that the philosopher must separate the soul as much as possible from the body. The physical world offers only distraction and confusion. The path to knowledge requires turning away from sensory experience toward pure rational contemplation. True education, therefore, cannot be putting knowledge into the soul like pouring water into an empty vessel. Education is turning the soul around from the world of becoming toward the world of being. As Plato writes in Republic Book 7, education is not what some people declare it to be, namely putting knowledge into souls that lack it, like putting sight into blind eyes. The soul naturally possesses the capacity for knowledge, but must be properly oriented. The philosopher's journey involves a dramatic reorientation from darkness to light. Plato presents perhaps philosophy's most powerful image in the 7th book of the Republic. Prisoners chained in an underground cave since birth, their legs and necks shackled so they cannot turn around, watching shadows dance across the wall before them. Behind these prisoners burns a fire, and between the fire and the prisoners runs a low wall, along which people carry objects, statues of men and animals, vessels, all manner of artifacts. The prisoners see only the shadows these objects cast upon the wall, hearing only the echoes of voices. They have never seen the actual objects, never glimpsed the fire, never imagined a world beyond their cave. Yet, they are completely confident in their knowledge, naming the shadows, predicting their patterns, honoring as wise those amongst them who best remember the sequences of shadows. This is the human condition. Plato argues, we mistake shadows for reality itself, living in a world of images and reflections, whilst remaining ignorant of the true forms that cast these shadows. The horror lies not merely in our ignorance, but in our absolute confidence in our shadow knowledge, our complete satisfaction with appearances. Now imagine one prisoner is freed from his chains. The liberation is neither gentle nor welcome. When he first turns around and sees the fire, his eyes burn with pain. The bright light overwhelms him. He sees the objects that cast the shadows, but these seem less real than the familiar shadows he has always known. If someone tells him that what he now sees is more real than what he saw before, he will not believe it. He will want to return to his chains, to the comfortable certainty of shadow watching. The ascent to truth is necessarily painful, necessarily resisted. But suppose this prisoner is compelled to continue his journey upward, dragged along the rough and steep ascent, until he emerges into sunlight. The pain intensifies. His eyes, accustomed to darkness, cannot bear the brilliance of the upper world. At first he can see only shadows and reflections in water. Gradually, as his eyes adjust, he perceives actual objects, then the stars and moon by night, and finally, the supreme achievement. He looks upon the sun itself, not in reflections, but in its own proper place. This ascent represents what Plato calls the upward journey of the soul into the intelligible realm. The shadows in the cave correspond to the images and reflections we encounter in the physical world. The objects casting shadows represent physical things themselves. The fire represents the sun in our visible world. But the journey outside the cave, this represents the soul's ascent to the realm of forms, to pure intelligible reality. The sun that illuminates the upper world corresponds to the form of the good which Plato describes as responsible for all that is right and beautiful in everything, providing not only truth to the objects of knowledge, but also being and reality to them. The freed prisoner now understands his former condition. He pities his fellow prisoners, no longer envies those honored for their skill at shadow watching. If he returned to the cave, his eyes readjusted to darkness would perform poorly at the old shadow games. The other prisoners would ridicule him, saying his journey upward had ruined his sight. More troubling still, if he attempted to free them and lead them upward, they would resist violently. Wouldn't they kill him? Plato asks directly, connecting this allegory to Socrates' fate in Athens. Here lies the philosopher's tragic position. Having seen reality, having glimpsed the good itself, the philosopher returns to the cave of human affairs, only to find that his wisdom appears as foolishness to those still chained. Plato constructs his most precise analysis of human cognition through what he calls the divided line in Republic Book VI. He asks us to imagine a line divided into 4 unequal segments, each representing a distinct level of mental activity and its corresponding objects. These 4 levels are eikasia, pistis, dianoia, and noesis, imagination, belief, mathematical thinking, and dialectical knowledge. Each segment reveals not merely what the mind encounters, but how it encounters reality, with increasing degrees of clarity and certainty as we ascend from the lowest to the highest form of understanding. The 2 lower segments correspond to the visible world that dominates ordinary human experience. At the lowest level, eikasia or imagination, the soul deals with images, shadows, reflections, and representations. Most people, Plato observes, take images for the things themselves. They mistake the shadow on the cave wall for reality itself. Above this lies pistis, or belief, where the mind grasps actual physical objects, living beings, and manufactured things. Yet both levels trap the soul in dependence upon sense experience, rather than reasoning. Those operating at the level of belief mistake physical objects for ultimate reality, never questioning whether their perceptions correspond to truth. The higher segments reveal the intelligible world, accessible only through reasoning. Mathematical thinking, or dianoia, occupies a unique position as bridge between physical and metaphysical realms. Mathematicians use visible forms and reason about them, though they are not thinking of these, but of the ideals which they resemble. They draw diagrams of triangles to reason about triangle itself, the perfect eternal mathematical object that no physical triangle can fully embody. Mathematical objects share the perfection and eternality of forms whilst remaining approachable through reasoning about physical representations. At the highest level stands dialectical knowledge, noesis, which grasps the forms themselves through pure reasoning without dependence on images or hypotheses. The dialectician destroys hypotheses and goes up to the first principle itself in order to confirm its conclusions. Where mathematicians accept their starting assumptions as given, the philosopher examines these very assumptions using pure reasoning to ascend toward the unhypothetical first principle, the form of the good, that gives truth and reality to all other forms. This represents the soul's ultimate cognitive achievement, direct intellectual vision of eternal reality itself, unmediated by sense, experience, or even mathematical reasoning. The structure of knowledge thus reveals the structure of the soul. For if cognition operates through these four distinct levels, then the soul itself must possess corresponding capacities that enable this ascent from shadows to the good itself. Part 3. The architecture of the soul, the inner republic. We all know the experience of being pulled in different directions by competing desires within ourselves. You want to eat the chocolate cake whilst simultaneously knowing you shouldn't. You feel drawn to seek revenge against someone who wronged you. Yet your better judgment counsels forgiveness. These aren't simply different preferences competing for attention. They reveal something profound about the architecture of human psychology that Plato was the first philosopher to systematically explore. In the Republic, Plato presents a deceptively simple example that unlocks this mystery. Consider a thirsty person who refuses to drink because they know the water is poisoned. The same individual simultaneously desires the water and refuses it, an apparent contradiction that would be impossible unless the soul contains distinct parts with different functions. One part craves the liquid, whilst another part restrains this craving through knowledge of danger. This everyday experience of internal conflict becomes Plato's key to understanding that the soul is not a simple unity, but a complex structure of competing elements. Through careful analysis of such psychological conflicts, Plato identified three distinct sources of motivation within every human soul. Reason, which he called logos, seeks truth, wisdom, and understanding. It's the part of us that calculates consequences, weighs evidence, and pursues knowledge for its own sake. Spirit, or thumos, seeks honor, recognition, and victory. Ced. It's what drives us toward courage in battle, righteous anger at injustice, and the desire to excel and be admired. Appetite, or epithumia, seeks pleasure, comfort, and material satisfaction. It drives us toward food, drink, sexual pleasure, and physical comfort. These aren't merely different categories of desire, but fundamentally different types of motivation with their own distinct logics and objects. When reason counsels saving money for the future, whilst appetite demands immediate purchase of something attractive, we're witnessing a conflict between two different psychological systems operating according to different principles. When spirit seeks glory in dangerous battle, whilst reason advises caution and safety, we see how these parts can work at cross purposes even when both serve legitimate human needs. Plato's crucial insight was that each part has its own proper pleasure and its own proper domain of excellence. Reason delights in learning, contemplation, and the discovery of truth. Spirit finds satisfaction in victory, honor, and the recognition of excellence. Appetite enjoys the immediate pleasures of physical existence, food, comfort, and sensual satisfaction. None of these is inherently evil, but problems arise when they compete for dominance rather than working together in proper hierarchy. The soul's health and happiness depend entirely on establishing the right relationship among these three parts. Justice in the soul occurs when reason rules through wisdom, spirit supports reason's decisions with courage, and appetite accepts rational guidance through temperance. As Plato puts it in Republic Book 4, justice means each part doing its own work, reason governing through knowledge, spirit defending through valor, and appetite producing through moderated desire. This creates what we might call an internal republic, where reason serves as the wise philosopher-king, spirit acts as the courageous guardian class, and appetite represents the productive citizenry. When this hierarchy functions properly, the soul experiences harmony and genuine happiness. Plato offers us one of philosophy's most vivid images of the soul's inner architecture. A charioteer struggling to control two very different horses as they race toward the heavens. In the Phaedrus, he describes this scene with remarkable detail. The good horse stands upright and clean-limbed, with a high neck and aquiline nose. His color is white, his eyes are black, and he is a lover of honor, with modesty and self-control. The bad horse presents a stark contrast. Crooked, lumbering, ill-made, stiff-necked, short-throated, snub-nosed, black-skinned, gray-eyed, bloodshot, the mate of insolence and pride. These aren't merely poetic flourishes. They capture the fundamental difference between spirit and appetite in their very nature. The charioteer represents reason, but reason as an active force that must navigate between these competing drives. The noble horse embodies our spirited nature, our capacity for courage, honor, and righteous anger. It responds to commands and appeals to excellence. The unruly horse represents appetite, our hunger for pleasure, comfort, and immediate satisfaction. It pulls constantly toward earthly distractions, deaf to reason's voice. The skilled charioteer must employ different strategies for each. The noble horse can be guided through persuasion and appeals to its love of honor, whilst the unruly horse requires the whip of discipline and sometimes brute force to keep it in line. Their destination makes all the difference. They race not towards some earthly goal, but toward the plain of truth, where souls can glimpse true being and feast upon contemplation of truth. This ascent demands everything from the charioteer. Reaching philosophical wisdom requires mastering both aspects of our non-rational nature, understanding when to encourage the noble horse's courage and when to restrain the base horse's desires. The vision of the forms awaits only those who achieve this mastery. Plato's allegory reveals moral struggle as the natural condition of embodied souls, rather than evidence of weakness. Even the best souls must constantly work to maintain proper direction. The charioteer's skill develops through practice and experience, learning to read each horse's tendencies and respond accordingly. Souls differ dramatically in their ability to control these horses. Some charioteers prove skilled enough to reach the full vision of truth. Others struggle and catch only glimpses of reality before losing control. Still others fall back to earth entirely, their horses having overpowered reason's guidance. The goal, crucially, is harmony rather than suppression. Plato doesn't advocate killing the horses, but getting them to work together toward the proper destination. The noble horse actually assists the charioteer, providing the energy and courage needed for the difficult ascent to truth. Even the unruly horse contributes necessary vitality when properly directed rather than allowed to run wild. Those souls that successfully complete the journey find themselves nourished and sustained by contemplating truth. But if the soul possesses this complex yet unified structure of reason, spirit, and appetite, what happens when death separates it from the body that houses this eternal struggle? Plato's most audacious claim strikes at the heart of human existence. The soul cannot die because it partakes in the very nature of eternal truth itself. In the Phaedo, Socrates presents an argument that would echo through millennia of philosophical thought. Only something eternal can truly know what is eternal. When we grasp mathematical truths, contemplate perfect justice, or understand the unchanging forms, we demonstrate that our souls possess a nature fundamentally different from the physical world of constant change and decay. The soul, Socrates argues, is most like the divine, deathless, intelligible, uniform, indissoluble, always the same as itself, whilst the body remains most like that which is human, mortal, multiform, unintelligible, soluble, and never consistently the same. This isn't mere metaphor but logical necessity. How could something purely material comprehend immaterial truths? How could something temporary understand the eternal? The very fact that we can think beyond the physical world proves we belong, at least partially, to a realm beyond it. But Plato offers more than abstract argument. He provides concrete evidence through the phenomenon he calls anamnesis. Learning, he suggests, isn't acquiring new knowledge but remembering truths the soul knew before embodiment. In the Meno, Socrates demonstrates this by questioning an untutored slave boy about geometry. Through careful questioning alone, without providing any information, he guides the boy to discover the theorem for doubling the area of a square. The boy's soul already possessed this knowledge. Socrates merely helped him remember it. The soul then, as being immortal and having been born again many times, has seen all things that exist, whether in this world or in the world below, and has knowledge of them all. Socrates concludes, "Birth brings forgetfulness, not ignorance. The trauma of entering physical existence causes the soul to forget its previous knowledge, but that knowledge remains accessible through philosophical inquiry. Every moment of genuine understanding becomes evidence for the soul's pre-existence and, by extension, its survival beyond bodily death. This immortality carries profound implications for how we live. The soul doesn't simply continue after death. It continues with the character we've shaped through our choices. In the Republic's myth of Plato reveals souls choosing their next incarnations based on the wisdom or folly developed in previous lives. The soul that spent its embodied existence pursuing bodily pleasures finds itself unprepared for the afterlife's challenges and likely to choose poorly in its next incarnation. But the philosopher's soul, having practiced separating itself from physical concerns and focusing on eternal truths, approaches death with confidence and wisdom. Death becomes not an ending, but a revelation. The soul's true condition, obscured during embodied life by bodily needs and distractions, finally emerges clearly. This is why Socrates can declare in the Phaedo that the one aim of those who practice philosophy in the right way is to practice and study nothing but dying and being dead. Philosophy isn't morbid preparation for annihilation, but joyful preparation for liberation. The philosopher learns to identify with the soul's immortal essence rather than the body's temporary concerns, making death's transition less traumatic and more transformative. If the soul is indeed immortal and carries forward the consequences of its earthly choices into future existences, then how we organize and direct this immortal essence becomes the most crucial question for human life. Part 4. The virtue of the soul, excellence, and the good life. Wisdom stands as the fundamental virtue of reason, the soul's capacity to distinguish good from evil and guide itself toward truth. In Republic Book 4, Plato defines wisdom as knowledge of what is beneficial for each part and for the whole soul, revealing that wisdom encompasses both theoretical understanding and practical insight into how to live well. The wise person grasps not merely abstract principles, but the concrete application of these principles to the complexities of human existence. They understand what truly benefits the soul versus what merely appears beneficial in the moment. Yet wisdom alone cannot guarantee right action. Knowing what is good doesn't automatically grant us the power to choose it when confronted by fear, pain, or social pressure. A person might understand perfectly that courage serves their highest good while still fleeing from danger, or recognize that certain pleasures ultimately harm them while still pursuing those very pleasures. Wisdom provides the blueprint, but the soul requires additional virtues to actualize that knowledge. Courage emerges as the necessary virtue of spirit. The power to act on reason's wise judgments despite fear, pain, or social opposition. Plato defines courage not as mere fearlessness, which can be found in the ignorant or reckless, but as the power of preserving through everything the right and lawful belief about what is to be feared and what is not. True courage requires discrimination. The courageous person fears the right things at the right time, whilst remaining unmoved by false fears that would deflect them from their proper course. Courage without proper direction becomes mere stubbornness or recklessness. Spirit operating independently of reason's guidance. The truly courageous person channels their natural spirited energy according to rational judgment about what is genuinely worth fighting for and what should be endured. They stand firm, not from blind impulse, but from clear understanding of what their highest nature demands. Temperance manifests as the virtue of appetite, NEA, the willing acceptance of reason's rule and proper moderation in desires. Plato describes temperance as a kind of order and control of certain pleasures and desires, but this control differs fundamentally from mere suppression. The temperate person experiences harmony rather than constant internal warfare. Their desires align with their rational judgments, rather than fighting against them because appetite recognizes that reason knows better what will truly satisfy. This recognition transforms the relationship between reason and appetite, from domination to cooperation. The temperate person doesn't constantly battle their desires, but has educated those desires to seek what genuinely fulfills rather than what merely appears attractive. Temperance requires all three parts of the soul working together. Reason, providing guidance, spirit supporting that guidance, and appetite accepting it willingly. Justice emerges as the master virtue that unifies all others, the condition where each part of the soul performs its proper function without interfering with the others. Plato provides his famous definition in Republic Book 4. Justice is doing one's own work and not meddling with what isn't one's own. When reason rules wisely, spirit supports courageously, and appetite obeys temperately, the soul achieves justice, HN, its natural excellence and the foundation of human flourishing. Justice creates the harmony that constitutes the good life. The just soul experiences internal peace because each part contributes its unique strength without overstepping its proper bounds. Plato presents us with a thesis that strikes against every intuition we possess about moral character. All virtues are ultimately one. In the Protagoras, Socrates makes the startling claim that wisdom and temperance, and courage, and justice and holiness are 5 names for the same thing. This isn't merely saying that virtues tend to appear together in good people. Plato argues that what we call different virtues are actually different aspects of the soul's proper relationship to the form of the good itself. Consider how this challenges everything we think we know about human character. We readily imagine someone who possesses courage but lacks wisdom, or someone temperate in their habits, yet unjust in their dealings with others. We speak of people having some virtues but not others, as though moral qualities were separate possessions that could be acquired independently. Plato demolishes this comfortable assumption. For him, you cannot truly possess one virtue without possessing them all, because virtue is fundamentally knowledge of good and evil applied to different spheres of human experience. This leads directly to Plato's intellectualist approach to ethics, perhaps the most counterintuitive doctrine in all of moral philosophy. Vice, according to Plato, is always a form of ignorance. No one does wrong willingly, but only because they mistake evil for good. The Socratic paradox states this clearly. No one goes willingly toward the bad, and if someone does something bad, he does it unwillingly. What appears to be moral weakness is actually confused thinking about what constitutes genuine good. This transforms our entire understanding of moral education. Rather than simply changing behavior through reward and punishment, moral education becomes fundamentally about turning the soul toward truth. The person who truly knows what justice is will act justly, not from external compulsion, but from internal necessity. Their soul, properly oriented toward the form of the good, cannot help but manifest justice in action. Apparent cases of weakness of will, where someone seems to know the right thing yet does wrong anyway, actually involve incomplete or confused knowledge, rather than genuine understanding being overcome by desire. The unity of virtue explains why moral progress appears to involve total transformation rather than gradual improvement in separate areas. Someone who truly understands justice will naturally be courageous in defending it, temperate in pursuing it, and wise in applying it. The philosopher who has glimpsed the form of the good cannot help but embody all virtues because they understand the ultimate source of all value. Partial virtue reveals itself as no virtue at all. Apparent courage without wisdom becomes mere recklessness. Apparent temperance without justice serves only selfish ends. This doctrine connects virtue to the soul's immortal destiny. In the Phaedo, Socrates argues that the soul that has pursued philosophy in the right way will be pure and dragged nothing bodily along with it. Virtue isn't simply good behavior, but the soul's transformation into its proper condition, its preparation for the best possible afterlife. The unified soul, aligned with eternal truth through knowledge of the good, participates in immortality itself. Socrates stood before the Athenian jury, facing death, and made a declaration that would echo through millennia. The unexamined life is not worth living. This wasn't philosophical posturing or intellectual arrogance. In the Apology, Socrates explains that his divine mission involves examining himself and others, demonstrating that the greatest good for a human being is to discuss virtue every day. For Plato, this represents far more than intellectual curiosity. It constitutes a moral imperative. Without constant self-examination, we remain prisoners in the cave of our own assumptions and prejudices, mistaking shadows for reality, never questioning the chains that bind us. The examined life demands that we question not merely our beliefs, but our desires, fears, and fundamental commitments. Plato understood that most people live unreflectively, driven by immediate impulses, social conventions, or inherited opinions. They mistake the intensity of their feelings for the validity of their judgments, confusing what they want with what they ought to want. True examination pierces through these comfortable illusions to reveal the actual structure of our souls and the genuine sources of our motivations. This philosophical self-examination involves the continuous work of ensuring reason maintains proper rule over spirit and appetite. Plato recognized that the soul easily falls into disorder without constant guidance by wisdom. Spirit can usurp reason's role, pursuing honor over truth, leading us to value reputation more than reality. Appetite can overwhelm both reason and spirit through the relentless pursuit of pleasure, reducing us to sophisticated animals driven by immediate gratification. Self-examination isn't self-indulgence, but the demanding discipline of maintaining psychological health and moral integrity. The examined life requires daily practices of reflection, questioning, and rational analysis of our choices and their underlying motivations. When we feel anger, we must ask whether this emotion serves justice or merely our wounded pride. When we desire something, we must determine whether this longing connects us to genuine good or merely apparent good. This process demands brutal honesty about our own self-deceptions and the courage to acknowledge uncomfortable truths about our character. Through this rigorous self-examination, we discover that true happiness, eudaimonia, comes not from external goods, but from the soul's internal harmony and proper orientation toward the good. In Republic Book IX, Plato demonstrates that the philosopher experiences the greatest pleasure because the pleasure connected with the contemplation of reality is the truest pleasure. This insight reverses popular assumptions about happiness. Most people seek pleasure, honor, or wealth, believing these external goods will provide satisfaction. Yet these cannot address the soul's deepest needs because they remain contingent, temporary, and ultimately outside our control. Philosophical contemplation provides the highest pleasure precisely because it connects us with what is most real and valuable. When reason apprehends eternal truths, when it glimpses the form of the good itself, the soul experiences a satisfaction that no bodily pleasure or worldly achievement can match. This isn't escapist otherworldliness, but recognition that lasting happiness must be grounded in what cannot be taken away, our capacity for wisdom, virtue, and rational understanding. The examined life fundamentally transforms our understanding of death, suffering, and existence's meaning. The philosopher who learns to identify with the soul's immortal essence rather than the body's temporary concerns faces life's challenges with equanimity and courage. Part 5. The problem of justice. What makes life worth living? Thrasymachus arrives in the Republic like a storm breaking over a peaceful philosophical discussion. His intervention transforms what began as a gentle inquiry into the nature of justice into something far more urgent and dangerous. With characteristic bluntness, he declares, "I say that justice is nothing other than the advantage of the stronger party. This isn't mere intellectual provocation." Thrasymachus articulates what many people secretly believe but dare not voice: that our moral rules are elaborate fictions designed to keep the powerless in line, whilst the powerful do exactly as they please. The challenge cuts to the heart of moral life itself. If justice is simply a tool of oppression, why should anyone choose to be just when they can escape the consequences of injustice? Thrasymachus presses this point ruthlessly. The perfectly unjust person who commits crimes whilst maintaining a reputation for virtue lives better than the genuinely just person who suffers for doing right. This creates a devastating practical crisis. If justice doesn't pay, then moral education becomes a form of systematic self-harm, teaching people to act against their own interests for the benefit of their oppressors. The Ring of Gyges crystallizes this challenge into its purest form. Glaucon, taking up Thrasymachus's argument in Republic Book 2, presents us with this thought experiment. If you possessed a ring that made you invisible and could commit any crime without detection or consequences, would you remain just? Is less than #0. 5# is greater than. Glaucon argues that no one is just willingly but from necessity, that anyone with the power to be unjust without punishment would immediately abandon justice. The ring strips away all external constraints and social pressures, revealing what we really value when no one is watching. This thought experiment exposes our deepest assumptions about human nature and moral motivation. If we would all become criminals given sufficient power and anonymity, then justice appears to be nothing more than weakness disguised as virtue. The just person becomes a fool who hasn't yet realized that morality is a game rigged against them. Plato recognizes that responding to this challenge requires proving something extraordinarily difficult, that justice is intrinsically valuable, good for its own sake, rather than merely for its external rewards. Glaucon demands that Socrates demonstrate justice belongs to the finest class of good things, those welcomed both for their own sake and for their consequences. This means showing that the just person is happier than the unjust person, even if the just person suffers external punishment, whilst the unjust person receives external rewards. To meet this challenge, Plato must move beyond surface appearances to discover what justice actually is, rather than what it merely seems to be. The question transforms from whether we should be just to what justice truly means for the human soul. Plato's most revolutionary insight about justice transforms our entire understanding of what it means to live well. Justice, he argues, is not about following rules or social conventions, but about the proper ordering of the soul itself. When reason rules through wisdom, spirit supports through courage, and appetite obeys through temperance, the soul achieves its natural excellence. As he writes in Republic Book 4, justice is doing one's own work and not meddling with what isn't one's own. This makes justice a structural condition of the soul rather than external behavior. The soul's justice mirrors the body's health. Just as physical health requires each organ to perform its proper function in harmony with others, psychological health demands that each part of the soul fulfill its role. Reason must govern, because only reason can perceive the good and calculate long-term consequences. Spirit must support reason's decisions with courage and determination. Appetite must obey, because its desires, whilst natural, lack wisdom about what truly satisfies. Injustice represents the disorder that results when appetite or spirit usurps reason's rightful rule. The unjust soul suffers from civil war. Appetite demands immediate gratification, whilst reason counsels delay. Spirit seeks honor, whilst reason advises humility. Different parts pull in different directions. Plato describes injustice as a kind of civil war between the three parts that prevents the soul from achieving its natural unity and purpose. This internal conflict creates a form of mental illness or spiritual disease. The just person experiences genuine happiness because their soul operates in harmony. All parts work together toward common goals, creating peace and satisfaction that external circumstances cannot destroy. The unjust person, by contrast, suffers from internal warfare regardless of wealth, power, or reputation. Even when they achieve their desires, They cannot escape the misery of their disordered soul. This reveals justice's intrinsic value. Justice isn't a constraint on happiness, but the very condition that makes happiness possible. As Plato concludes, justice is virtue and wisdom. Injustice is vice and ignorance. The just person sets his own house in good order and is on good terms with himself. If this analysis holds true, then the most unjust person should be the most miserable, a claim that challenges everything we observe about worldly success. Plato delivers one of philosophy's most counterintuitive arguments in Republic Book 9. The completely unjust person, the tyrant, is actually the most miserable human being possible. This seems absurd at first glance. The tyrant appears to possess everything we might desire: unlimited power, vast wealth, and the ability to satisfy any appetite without restraint. Yet Plato demonstrates that beneath this facade of absolute freedom lies the most profound form of slavery and wretchedness. The tyrannical soul, Plato argues, is enslaved to its basest appetites, driven entirely by what he calls erotic love, anger, and pleasure, without any rational control whatsoever. Where the just soul maintains harmony through reason's governance, the tyrant soul exists in complete disorder. The rational part, which should rule, has been overthrown entirely. The spirited part, which should support reason's decisions, has become corrupted into mere aggression and violence. The appetitive part, which should obey, has become an absolute dictator, demanding satisfaction at any cost. This internal chaos creates a devastating paradox. The tyrant appears to have unlimited freedom, yet is the least free person alive. They cannot choose their actions based on rational deliberation because reason has been dethroned. Instead, they are compelled by whichever appetite happens to be strongest at any moment. These tyrannical desires prove insatiable. The more they are fed, the more voracious they become. Is less than #0. 5# is greater than. Each satisfaction brings only temporary relief, followed by even greater craving. The tyrant becomes trapped in an endless cycle of compulsion, temporary gratification, and renewed desperation. Plato observes that the tyrant lives his whole life without ever being friends with anyone, always a master to one man or a slave to another, never getting a taste of freedom or true friendship. This isolation stems from the tyrant's fundamental relationship to others. Having organized their entire existence around injustice, they view every other person as either a tool to be used or a threat to be eliminated. They cannot experience genuine friendship because friendship requires recognizing others as valuable in themselves, not merely as means to one's own ends. This perspective creates a paranoid existence of constant fear. The tyrant knows that everyone around them is motivated by the same selfish appetites that drive their own behavior. Since they would betray anyone for personal advantage, they assume everyone would betray them. Since they respect no moral limits, they expect others to respect none either. The tyrant must constantly guard against threats both real and imagined, never able to trust advisors, friends, or even family members. Plato describes this psychological state with striking imagery. The tyrant is always afraid and full of convulsions and pains, and like the city he rules, full of fear and lament. The external power that seems to promise security actually generates its own forms of torment. The tyrant cannot enjoy their wealth because they must constantly protect it. They cannot savor their power because they must perpetually defend it. They cannot find peace in their pleasures because each satisfaction only intensifies their underlying anxiety about loss. This analysis reveals Plato's profound insight that injustice creates its own punishment through the psychological damage it inflicts on the unjust person. The tyrant doesn't need external retribution. Their way of life ensures their own misery. Their apparent success masks a fundamental failure to achieve what every human being ultimately seeks: a harmonious, flourishing existence. The contrast with the Philosopher-King could not be more complete. Part 6. The Ideal State. Justice writ large. The state emerges not from human ambition or the desire for power, but from a fundamental fact about human nature itself. No individual possesses the capacity for complete self-sufficiency. As Plato observes in the Republic, a city comes to be because none of us is self-sufficient. But we all need many things. This dependency extends far beyond mere material survival. Whilst we require others for food, shelter, and protection, we equally depend upon them for education, artistic expression, moral development, and the pursuit of wisdom itself. The political community represents humanity's natural response to these multiple layers of need, making collective life not an artificial constraint upon individual freedom, but the necessary condition for human flourishing. This mutual dependence inevitably generates specialization. As individuals discover they can best contribute to the common good by developing particular talents rather than attempting universal competence. Plato notes that more things are produced and better and more easily when one person performs one task according to his nature, at the right moment, and at leisure from other occupations. The shoemaker who concentrates exclusively on crafting footwear produces superior shoes to someone dividing attention amongst multiple crafts. Similarly, the farmer focused solely on agriculture yields better harvests than one simultaneously attempting to weave cloth and forge metal. This principle of specialized excellence raises the fundamental question: how shall these diverse functions be organized to create harmony rather than chaos? Is less than #0, 精好大于. Plato's crucial insight emerges from recognizing that the state's structure must mirror the soul's architecture. Just as the individual soul contains three distinct parts: reason, spirit, and appetite, that must work in proper relationship, the state requires three corresponding classes to function justly. This parallel isn't coincidental, but reflects Plato's conviction that the same things that exist in the city exist also in each individual. Political problems are essentially psychological problems manifested on a collective scale. We can understand justice in the soul by first examining justice writ large in the state, where the dynamics become visible and analyzable. Justice in the state, like justice in the soul, consists of each part performing its designated function without interference from the others. The productive class, corresponding to appetite, should focus on creating wealth and material goods. The guardian class, corresponding to spirit, should concentrate on defense and law enforcement. The ruler class, corresponding to reason, should dedicate itself to wisdom and governance. As Plato declares, when each of these classes does its own work in the city, that is justice and makes the city just. This three-part structure isn't arbitrary, but emerges necessarily from human psychology itself. The challenge becomes determining how to select, train, and organize these classes to ensure they fulfill their proper roles whilst maintaining the delicate balance upon which justice depends. The selection of guardians represents perhaps the most radical departure from conventional political thinking in Plato's Republic. These are not rulers chosen by birth, wealth, or popular election, but individuals identified through their demonstrated philosophical temperament, NIA, those rare souls who love wisdom more than honor, wealth, or pleasure. In Book 2 of the Republic, Plato describes the ideal guardian as possessing a philosophical nature, combined with spirit, speed, and strength. This isn't merely intellectual ability, but a fundamental orientation of character that must be rigorously tested through various temptations and pressures. The selection process itself reveals Plato's conviction that political authority should rest on virtue rather than power. Guardians must demonstrate the proper balance of gentleness toward citizens and fierceness toward enemies, a combination that requires both courage and wisdom. They cannot simply be the strongest or the most ambitious, for such qualities often corrupt. Instead, they must show themselves capable of placing the common good above personal advantage, even when faced with opportunities for private gain. Having identified these philosophical souls, Plato proposes something truly revolutionary. Guardians must live in complete communism. None of them should have any private property beyond what is wholly necessary. He declares in Book 3, they share meals in common, own no individual wealth, and maintain no private families that might create conflicts between personal interest and duty to the state. This eliminates the fundamental source of political corruption, the pursuit of personal wealth, or the advancement of family interests at the expense of the common good. Plato recognizes that the greatest harm to cities comes when someone says, mine and not mine, about the same thing. When rulers possess private property, they inevitably face conflicts between their personal interests and their public duties. The guardian class resolves this tension by eliminating private interest entirely. They can improve their own condition only by improving the condition of the entire state. The most controversial aspect of this arrangement involves the community of wives and children among the guardians. This proposal, shocking to conventional morality, serves a precise philosophical purpose, ensuring that guardians' loyalty belongs entirely to the state rather than to particular individuals. Plato argues that private family attachments create the very conflicts between personal affection and public duty that corrupt ordinary rulers. Instead, guardians should regard all citizens of their generation as brothers and sisters, all older citizens as parents, and all younger citizens as children. This isn't meant to destroy love, but to universalize it. Rather than restricting affection to biological families, guardians extend their care to the entire community. Their decisions cannot be influenced by favoritism toward particular children or spouses because they have no particular children or spouses, only the community as a whole. The authority of guardians derives not from power, wealth, or popular mandate, but from their demonstrated wisdom and complete dedication to the common good. Their communistic lifestyle ensures they cannot benefit personally from their political decisions. As Plato observes, those who are to guard the city and its laws should be those who are least likely to want to harm it. The guardian's material interests align perfectly with the state's interests because they have no separate material interests. Yet this radical separation of the guardian class from ordinary citizens creates its own challenge. Plato presents one of philosophy's most controversial proposals in the Republic, that the ideal state must be founded upon what he calls a noble lie, a foundational myth that shapes how citizens understand their place in the political order. This is not merely a story told to children, but a comprehensive narrative designed to create lasting social cohesion by grounding the class structure in nature rather than human convention. The myth itself is elegantly crafted. Plato suggests that citizens should believe they are all born from the earth itself, making them literal brothers and sisters, but that the God who formed them mixed different metals into their souls. As he writes in Book 3 of the Republic, "All of you in the city are brothers, but the God who made you mixed some gold into those who are adequately equipped to rule, some silver into the auxiliaries, and iron and bronze into the farmers and other craftsmen. The golden souls become the guardian class, the philosopher rulers who govern with wisdom. The silver souls serve as auxiliaries, the warrior class that protects the state. The bronze and iron souls work as producers, craftsmen, and farmers who sustain the community materially. This foundational story serves a precise psychological and political purpose: to create acceptance of the class structure, whilst preventing the envy and resentment that typically poison political communities. When people believe their social roles reflect natural differences in ability and divine assignment, rather than arbitrary privilege or systematic oppression, they can contribute their talents without the corrosive effects of class warfare. Plato hopes that citizens will believe this story and thereby care more for the city and for each other, rather than pursuing narrow self-interest at the expense of the common good. The controversial nature of this proposal reveals profound tensions in Plato's thinking about truth, politics, and human nature. Here is a philosopher committed to the pursuit of truth through rational inquiry, yet advocating that political stability requires most people to accept mythical explanations they cannot rationally demonstrate. Plato distinguishes between this noble lie, told for the benefit of the entire community, and base lies, told for selfish advantage, but the distinction raises uncomfortable questions about when deception serves justice and when it merely serves power. The deeper insight emerges when we recognize that Plato is identifying something universal about political life. Every political community requires shared beliefs and values that transcend individual self-interest, even when these beliefs cannot be philosophically proven to everyone's satisfaction. Modern democratic societies depend on foundational stories about human equality, natural rights, or popular sovereignty that most citizens accept without sustained philosophical examination. The alternative to shared political mythology is not pure rational consensus, but fragmentation, conflict, and the dissolution of any common purpose. Plato's noble lie thus reveals his understanding that political communities exist in the tension between truth and necessity, between what philosophers know and what citizens need to believe for society to function harmoniously. As he observes, the city whose citizens are least eager to rule is necessarily best governed, suggesting that the best political order requires people who accept their roles not from ambition or resentment, but from a genuine belief in the justice of the whole arrangement. Part 7. The Philosopher-King. Wisdom as the basis of authority. Plato presents his most audacious and controversial political claim in Book 5 of the Republic. Cities will never cease from ill until philosophers rule, as kings or kings become philosophers, and political power and philosophy coincide. This declaration strikes us as paradoxical because it unites what appears fundamentally incompatible. Philosophers typically withdraw from the messy world of politics to contemplate eternal truth in quiet solitude. Politicians immerse themselves in temporal power, popular opinion, and the art of persuasion. The philosophical life seeks wisdom through contemplation of unchanging reality. The political life demands action, compromise, and navigation of shifting human desires. How can these opposing orientations possibly merge? The apparent contradiction runs deeper than mere lifestyle preferences. Philosophy requires detachment from worldly concerns to perceive truth clearly. Politics demands engagement with immediate practical problems and competing interests. The philosopher values knowledge above all else. The politician must master the dynamics of power, influence, and public sentiment. These seem like fundamentally different vocations requiring entirely different temperaments and skills. Yet, Plato's insight reveals why this apparent paradox actually points toward the only genuine solution to political problems. Political questions are ultimately moral questions about justice, virtue, and the common good. Without knowledge of the form of the good itself, political decisions become merely expressions of opinion, personal interest, or popular prejudice, rather than genuine understanding of what promotes human flourishing. Only those who comprehend absolute truth can make truly wise decisions about human affairs, because they alone possess the standard by which to measure all earthly arrangements. Unless philosophers rule, or rulers genuinely study philosophy, Plato argues, there is no end to political evils. This isn't mere intellectual snobbery, but recognition that political expertise, like medical or mathematical expertise, requires specialized knowledge that most people simply lack. The physician who understands the body's true nature can heal disease. The mathematician who grasps eternal numerical relationships can solve practical engineering problems. Similarly, only the philosopher who knows the good itself can organize human society according to justice rather than mere convention or force. Conventional politics fails precisely because it operates in the realm of opinion rather than knowledge. Democratic assemblies vote based on popular prejudice, temporary advantage, or skillful rhetoric, rather than genuine understanding of what promotes the common good. Plato's ship of state analogy captures this perfectly. Imagine passengers on a vessel voting on navigation instead of deferring to the trained navigator who knows the stars, winds, and destination. The result is inevitable disaster. Not because the passengers are evil, but because they lack the specialized knowledge that safe passage requires. The Philosopher-King solves this fundamental problem by combining wisdom about eternal truth with practical experience in temporal affairs. The philosopher's knowledge of the good provides an absolute standard for evaluating laws, institutions, and policies rather than relying on tradition, popular sentiment, or personal preference. The true philosopher faces a profound dilemma that strikes at the heart of political authority. Those who have glimpsed eternal truth find themselves reluctant to descend into the messy, temporal affairs of human governance. Plato acknowledges this tension directly in the Republic, noting that philosophers who have seen the beautiful, the just, and the good will not be willing to occupy themselves with human affairs, but will want their souls to spend all their time dwelling in the upper region. This creates what appears to be an insurmountable problem for the ideal state. Those most qualified to rule, those who understand justice itself rather than mere shadows of justice, are precisely those least interested in ruling. Meanwhile, those most eager for political power are typically those least equipped to wield it wisely. The ambitious seek office for personal gain, status, or the thrill of dominance, whilst the philosopher seeks truth and wisdom above all earthly concerns. Yet Plato transforms this apparent weakness into the philosopher's greatest qualification for leadership. The very reluctance that seems to disqualify the philosopher actually ensures their fitness to rule. Those who desire power are corrupted by that very desire, whilst those who understand power's true nature, its burdens, responsibilities, and potential for harm, can be trusted with authority precisely because they do not seek it for its own sake. The philosopher's reluctance serves as a natural safeguard against tyranny and corruption. They will not perpetuate their rule for personal benefit, nor will they use political authority to enrich themselves or their allies. As Plato observes, the city in which those who are to rule are least eager to rule is necessarily best and most free from civil war. The reluctant ruler serves the common good rather than private interest, because they gain nothing from power except the burden of responsibility. This reluctance must be overcome, but through duty rather than force. The philosopher owes their education to the community that protected and nurtured their development. The state provided the conditions necessary for philosophical contemplation, peace, order, and the leisure required for sustained inquiry into eternal truths. Having benefited from this social investment, philosophers have a moral obligation to repay their debt through service. Plato makes this clear. It isn't the law's concern to make any one class in the city outstandingly happy, but to contrive to spread happiness throughout the city by bringing the citizens into harmony with each other. The philosopher cannot justly enjoy the fruits of contemplation, whilst ignoring the community that made such contemplation possible. Their wisdom becomes a public trust, not a private possession. The philosopher's rule will be temporary and reluctant, always seeking to return to contemplation. This temporal limitation ensures they will not develop tyrannical ambitions or become corrupted by extended exposure to political power. They will rule only as long as necessary to establish just institutions and train worthy successors, then gladly return to the philosophical life they truly cherish. Plato envisions philosophers who take turns at the hard work of politics, while spending most of their time dwelling with each other in the pure realm. This rotation prevents any individual from becoming too attached to political authority, whilst ensuring continuity of philosophical governance. Plato's most radical challenge to our assumptions about political legitimacy begins with a simple observation that renders democracy philosophically indefensible. In every other domain of human activity, we recognize that expertise matters decisively. When you need surgery, you don't convene a popular vote amongst your neighbors to determine the best procedure. When navigating a ship across treacherous waters, you don't ask passengers to vote on which direction to sail. When solving mathematical problems, you don't submit equations to democratic referendum. Yet, when it comes to the most complex questions of all, how should we live together? What constitutes justice? How should society be organized? Democracy assumes that everyone's opinion carries equal weight, regardless of their knowledge, wisdom, or understanding. This contradiction exposes the fundamental irrationality at democracy's heart. Political and moral questions are not simpler than medical or mathematical ones. They are vastly more complex. They require deep understanding of human nature, the structure of virtue, the relationship between individual flourishing and social harmony, and the eternal principles that govern reality itself. To assume that someone who has never examined these questions philosophically possesses equal insight to someone who has devoted their life to understanding them is not egalitarian generosity, it is intellectual absurdity. Plato's ship of state analogy illuminates this absurdity with devastating clarity. Picture a vessel where the passengers have overpowered the captain and now fight amongst themselves over who should steer, though none of them has learned navigation. They regard the true navigator, one who pays attention to the seasons of the year, the sky, the stars, the winds, and all that pertains to his craft, as a useless stargazer, whilst they make decisions based on momentary whims, personal preferences, and popular prejudices. The ship lurches from course to course, never reaching its destination, because those making decisions lack the knowledge necessary to choose wisely. Democratic Athens provided history's most tragic illustration of this principle when it condemned Socrates to death. Here was the wisest man in the city, whose only crime was asking the questions that could have saved his fellow citizens from their ignorance about virtue and the good life. Yet, popular opinion, swayed by prejudice and threatened by genuine inquiry, chose to silence the very voice that offered them genuine wisdom. The majority was not merely wrong, it was systematically, catastrophically wrong, destroying the one person who could have guided them toward truth. This reveals democracy's deepest flaw. Popular opinion reflects not wisdom, but the accumulated prejudices, self-interests, and unexamined assumptions of the masses. The majority can be wrong about justice just as easily as they can be wrong about medicine or mathematics. Indeed, they are more likely to be wrong about justice, because political questions engage their emotions, their desires for advantage, and their resistance to the difficult self-examination that true wisdom requires. Democracy thus becomes a tyranny of ignorance over wisdom, ensuring that the least qualified voices drown out those who actually understand what promotes human flourishing. Only those who have completed the rigorous philosophical education and achieved direct knowledge of the form of the good possess the expertise necessary to distinguish genuine justice from mere opinion or self-serving preference. The Philosopher-King's authority derives not from popular consent, but from wisdom itself, from having seen the eternal standards by which all earthly arrangements must be measured. Part 8. Education and the Transformation of the Soul. Plato revolutionized our understanding of education itself. In Republic Book 7, he declares that education isn't what some people declare it to be, namely, putting knowledge into souls that lack it, like putting sight into blind eyes. This strikes at the heart of conventional thinking about learning. Most people treat education as filling an empty container, pouring facts and skills into passive minds. Plato sees something entirely different. Education as conversion, a fundamental turning of the soul from one way of being toward another. The power to learn, Plato insists, is present in everyone's soul. We are not blank slates waiting to be written upon. Rather, we possess an innate capacity for truth that must be properly oriented. The soul naturally reaches toward reality, but it can be misdirected toward shadows and appearances instead of genuine being. Education becomes the art of turning this natural capacity in the right direction, away from the world of becoming and toward the world of eternal forms. The cave allegory illuminates this process with startling clarity. The freed prisoner experiences genuine education when he turns from shadows toward the fire, from darkness toward light. But this turning around, what Plato calls periagoge, is necessarily painful and disorienting. The prisoner's eyes hurt in the firelight. He wants to return to the familiar shadows because they seem clearer and more comfortable than this harsh new reality. This captures something essential about all genuine learning. Real education involves abandoning beliefs we have held dear, questioning assumptions that have structured our entire worldview. It requires intellectual courage because we must leave the security of what we think we know and venture into unfamiliar territory. The prisoner doesn't simply acquire new information about shadows and fire. His entire relationship to reality undergoes transformation. Plato understood that this transformation must begin early, before the soul becomes fixed in false patterns of thought and desire. In Republic Books 2 and 3, he details how music and gymnastics shape character and prepare the ground for later philosophical development. Music education cultivates the soul's sense of rhythm, harmony, and beauty. Through carefully chosen stories and songs, children learn to love what is noble and hate what is base. Their emotional responses become properly attuned to truth and goodness. Gymnastic education develops courage, self-discipline, and the proper relationship to bodily pleasures. Physical training teaches the soul to govern appetite through reason and to face difficulty with spirited determination. These early forms of education create harmony between the soul's three parts: reason, spirit, and appetite, making possible the later emergence of philosophical wisdom. The goal is not to produce clever technicians or successful professionals, but to awaken the soul's natural love of wisdom. The properly educated person becomes what Plato calls a lover of learning, who pursues knowledge for its own sake rather than for external rewards. Such a person loves all learning and is always reaching out for the whole, seeking to understand the fundamental principles that govern reality itself. This transformation of the soul's fundamental orientation creates the philosopher, one who has turned completely from the world of appearances toward the world of truth. If education aims at this profound conversion, we need a specific curriculum that can reliably produce such transformed souls. The guardians must undergo 10 years of mathematical study before approaching philosophy proper. Arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and harmonics form this foundation because mathematical objects are eternal and perfect, training the mind to think about unchanging realities beyond the physical world. Plato argues in the Republic that arithmetic has a very great and elevating effect, compelling the soul to reason about abstract number. This mathematical preparation serves philosophy by demonstrating that reason can achieve certain knowledge and by accustoming the mind to abstract thinking about invisible realities. Mathematics reveals that the mind can grasp truths beyond sensory experience. When geometers draw triangles on papyrus, they reason about perfect triangular forms that no physical triangle can embody. When arithmeticians use visible symbols, they think about pure numbers that exist independently of any material representation. Plato observes that mathematicians use visible forms and reason about them, though they are not thinking of these, but of the ideals which they resemble. Yet mathematics still relies on hypotheses and visible diagrams as starting points, pointing beyond itself toward pure dialectical reasoning. The most promising students then undertake 5 years of dialectic, NINE, the art of philosophical reasoning that moves beyond all hypotheses to grasp the unhypothetical first principle, the form of the good. Plato describes dialectic as the coping stone of the studies that destroys hypotheses and goes up to the first principle itself. Unlike mathematics, dialectical reasoning uses no images or diagrams, but pure thought to examine the assumptions that other disciplines take for granted. Only dialectic can provide the absolute knowledge necessary for wise rule. Even after mastering dialectic, guardians require 15 years of practical experience in lower offices before being entrusted with supreme political power. Ruling demands direct knowledge of the good that gives meaning to justice, but also understanding of temporal affairs. This lengthy preparation ensures that philosopher-kings possess both theoretical wisdom and practical judgment. They must go down again among the prisoners in the cave and apply their knowledge of the good to the messy realities of political life. If this entire educational program aims at knowledge of the good, we must understand what the good is and why it stands at the center of reality and knowledge. The sun illuminates everything we see, yet we cannot look directly at it without being blinded. Plato uses this familiar truth to reveal something profound about the nature of reality itself. Just as the sun stands in a unique relationship to the visible world, the form of the good stands in that same relationship to the intelligible world of forms. This is not mere metaphor. It is the key to understanding how knowledge, reality, and value are ultimately grounded. The parallel runs deeper than illumination alone. The sun provides the power of being seen to visible things, but also their coming to be, growth, and nourishment. Without the sun, nothing in the physical world would exist or flourish. Similarly, the good is responsible not only for the knowability of the objects of knowledge, but also for their being and reality. Every form that exists, justice, beauty, truth itself, derives its reality from the good. The good stands as the source of existence for everything else that is real. This places the good in an extraordinary position. It is beyond being in dignity and power, transcending even the fundamental distinction between existence and non-existence. The good cannot be just another thing that exists, because it is the source of existence for all other things. It is the ultimate explanation for why anything has reality or value at all, standing at the apex of the entire metaphysical hierarchy that structures reality. Yet, this supreme importance, just as we cannot look directly at the sun without being blinded, we cannot grasp the good directly through ordinary reasoning. We must approach it through its effects, through the truth and reality it gives to other forms, through the knowledge it makes possible, through the values it grounds. The good is the most important thing to learn, but also the most difficult to understand. Knowledge of the good transforms everything else we think we know. The philosopher who has glimpsed the good possesses the ultimate standard for all moral and political decisions, because they can distinguish between what is truly valuable and what merely appears valuable. They can separate genuine justice from mere convention, real beauty from superficial appearance, true courage from mere recklessness. In the knowable realm, the form of the good is the last thing to be seen, and it is reached only with difficulty. But once seen, it provides the foundation for all wise action. This knowledge creates the philosopher-ruler. Only someone who has seen the good can rule wisely, because they understand the true nature of justice, beauty, and truth rather than relying on shifting opinion or inherited tradition. Their entire understanding of reality and value has been transformed. They become capable of creating just institutions and educating future guardians because their decisions flow from knowledge of what is ultimately real and valuable. Anyone who is to act sensibly in private or public must see the form of the good. But if the good is the source of all truth and reality, standing at the summit of what truly exists, then we must ask, what about those activities that seem to lead us away from this truth? What about art, which creates images of images, copies of copies? How does artistic imitation relate to this hierarchy of reality? And does it guide souls toward the good or away from it? Part 9. The Critique of Art and Poetry. Art is fundamentally mimesis, imitation or representation. But this raises the crucial question of what exactly art is imitating. In Republic Book X, Plato introduces his famous example of three beds: the form of bed created by God, the physical bed crafted by the carpenter, and the painted bed created by the artist. This creates a hierarchy of reality where each level moves further from truth. The form represents perfect reality. The carpenter's bed participates in that form, but remains imperfect, and the artist's painted bed merely copies the physical appearance of an already imperfect imitation. Understanding art's place in this hierarchy becomes crucial for evaluating its value and effects on the soul. Artists imitate the physical world around them, But Plato has demonstrated that the physical world is itself only an imperfect imitation of the eternal forms. This makes artistic representation a copy of a copy, 3 times removed from truth and reality. As Plato argues in Republic Book X, the artist produces something that is far removed from reality and knows little or nothing about what he imitates. The artist observes a carpenter's bed and paints what appears to be a bed. But this painted bed cannot function as furniture, cannot provide rest, cannot serve any practical purpose. It exists purely as appearance divorced from essence. Artistic skill in representation should not be confused with knowledge of reality or wisdom about what is being represented. This metaphysical distance from truth means that art leads the soul further away from knowledge rather than toward it. When we admire a beautiful painting or moving poem, we are actually being seduced by shadows of shadows, mistaking artistic skill for wisdom and emotional manipulation for genuine insight into reality. Plato expresses concern that art gratifies the senseless part of each person, rather than the rational part that seeks truth. The artist creates convincing illusions that appeal to our senses and emotions. But these very qualities that make art compelling also make it philosophically dangerous. Art's appeal to the senses and emotions can distract us from the philosophical quest for genuine knowledge. This critique challenges the traditional Greek view of poets as teachers and sources of wisdom about gods, heroes, and moral virtue. Plato argues that poets like Homer, despite their reputation for wisdom, actually know nothing about the subjects they portray so convincingly. He poses a devastating challenge. If Homer really knew about the things he imitates, wouldn't he have made actual things rather than imitations? If Homer truly understood warfare, wouldn't he have been a great general? If he understood virtue, wouldn't he have founded schools of moral education? The poet's skill lies in creating convincing appearances, not in possessing genuine knowledge. If art is metaphysically problematic, as a copy of a copy, we must also examine its effects on the soul's internal harmony and moral development. Poetry and drama accomplish something deeply troubling within the human soul. They bypass reason entirely, speaking directly to our emotions and appetites with a power that rational argument cannot match. When we watch a tragic performance, we find ourselves weeping for fictional characters whose sufferings we know to be mere illusion. When we attend a comedy, we laugh at crude jokes and base situations that our rational mind would normally reject. This emotional engagement seems harmless, even cathartic. But Plato recognizes something far more dangerous at work. In Republic Book X, Plato argues that imitative poetry fundamentally imitates human beings acting under compulsion or voluntarily, whilst focusing relentlessly on characters feeling pleasure or pain, rather than on rational deliberation about what is truly good. Tragic heroes rage, weep, and despair. Comic characters indulge their appetites and mock virtue. Neither form presents us with models of rational self-control or philosophical wisdom. Instead, they offer us characters driven by passion, circumstance, and immediate emotional response. This focus on emotion rather than reason creates a profound psychological disturbance. The soul, properly ordered, maintains reason as its ruling element, with spirit and appetite serving as disciplined allies. But poetry and drama invert this natural hierarchy. They make emotion the dominant force, encouraging us to feel deeply about fictional situations while suspending the rational faculties that would normally evaluate and moderate such responses. We allow ourselves to experience grief, anger, fear, and desire, with an intensity that reason would never permit in real life. The corruption extends beyond the immediate aesthetic experience. Plato observes that when we enjoy giving way to feeling at the theater, the inevitable result is that we become emotional in our own lives. The habits of emotional indulgence that art encourages do not remain confined to the artistic sphere. They seep into our daily existence, weakening our capacity for rational self-control and moral discipline. The person who weeps freely at tragic performances finds it harder to maintain philosophical composure when facing real suffering. The person who laughs at crude comedy becomes more susceptible to base pleasures in ordinary life. Even those who maintain strict emotional discipline in their actual affairs may find themselves corrupted by artistic experience. Art provides what seems like a morally neutral space for emotional indulgence, a kind of sanctioned holiday from rational control. We tell ourselves that these are only stories, only performances, only aesthetic experiences. But Plato recognizes that it's hard to realize that what feeds and strengthens the emotions in regard to other people's sufferings is bound to affect our own. The soul cannot compartmentalize so neatly. What strengthens emotion in one sphere strengthens it in all spheres. This psychological critique reveals art's fundamental opposition to proper education. The goal of true education is to establish reason's authority over the soul's lower elements, creating the internal harmony that constitutes virtue. But art works systematically against this educational project. It strengthens precisely those aspects of the soul that education seeks to discipline. It makes appetite and spirit more powerful, more demanding, more capable of overwhelming rational judgment. As Plato concludes, imitative poetry harms the understanding of those who hear it by strengthening the inferior part of the soul. The implications extend far beyond individual corruption. Traditional poetry corrupts the very foundations of moral education by presenting false images of the gods as jealous, deceptive, and fundamentally immoral beings. In the Republic, Plato launches a devastating critique of Homer and Hesiod, showing how their portrayals of divine characters fighting amongst themselves, lying to mortals, and indulging in base passions creates a theological crisis that undermines all moral instruction. When Zeus deceives his own wife, when gods engage in petty squabbles over human affairs, when divine beings act from spite and jealousy, young people learn that even the highest authorities in the universe operate without moral constraints. Plato establishes his principle that God is really good and must be spoken of as such, and that God is not the cause of all things, but only of good things. This isn't mere theological preference, it's recognition that false theology inevitably produces false morality, teaching future guardians that justice itself is optional. The heroes of traditional poetry prove equally corrupting as moral exemplars. Homer's Achilles, driven by rage and wounded pride, provides a catastrophic model for those who must embody rational self-control. When epic heroes weep excessively over losses, when they're overcome by fear in battle, when noble characters act dishonorably to achieve their goals, they teach future guardians that emotional excess is not only acceptable but heroic. Plato recognizes that young people naturally imitate the characters they admire most, and traditional poetry consistently presents figures who prioritize personal passion over rational duty. The guardian who has learned from Achilles that rage justifies revenge, or from Odysseus that deception serves noble ends, cannot maintain the unwavering commitment to justice that leadership requires. These stories don't merely entertain, they shape souls in directions fundamentally incompatible with just governance. Poetry's emotional appeal makes it far more persuasive than rational argument, giving it dangerous power to shape souls toward falsehood despite its distance from truth. The poet's skill in representation can make corrupt values seem attractive whilst making genuine virtue appear difficult or boring. Plato observes that the imitator knows nothing worth mentioning about what he imitates, yet can convince audiences through emotional manipulation rather than rational demonstration. This creates a profound political danger. Poetry's very effectiveness at moving hearts makes it capable of undermining the rational foundations that just states require. When citizens are trained to respond emotionally rather than rationally to moral questions, they become susceptible to demagogues who appeal to passion rather than wisdom. Yet Plato's critique targets poetry's typical content and effect rather than the art form itself. He allows that poetry, praising virtue and truth, could find place in the ideal state, declaring that if you admit the honeyed muse in lyric or epic, pleasure and pain will be kings in your city instead of law and reason. The issue isn't artistic beauty but moral and political consequences. He even invites poetry's defenders to demonstrate that it benefits human life and expresses willingness to welcome it back if they can prove its value. This reveals that Plato's concern isn't aesthetic, but educational. Recognizing that if poetry typically leads away from truth through emotional manipulation, we need methods of inquiry that lead toward truth through rational examination. Part 10. The Socratic Method, Dialectic as the Path to Truth. Socrates stands before the Athenian jury and makes an extraordinary admission. I know that I know nothing. This declaration of ignorance, recorded in Plato's Apology, becomes the foundation of philosophical wisdom. Socrates had spent years examining the supposed experts of Athens, politicians who claimed to understand justice, poets who professed insight into beauty, craftsmen who believed their technical skills granted them universal wisdom. In each case, he discovered the same troubling pattern. Whilst these individuals possessed genuine expertise in their particular domains, they mistakenly believed this knowledge extended to the most crucial questions of human existence. What is virtue? How should we live? What makes a life worth living? Through systematic questioning, Socrates revealed that their confidence was misplaced. I am likely to be wiser than he to this small extent. He concludes that I do not think I know what I do not know. This recognition of ignorance becomes the first step toward genuine knowledge. Those who falsely believe they already possess wisdom have no motivation to seek it. Only by acknowledging the depths of our ignorance can we begin the ascent toward truth. The Socratic method emerges from this insight as a systematic approach to exposing the contradictions and inadequacies in our most fundamental beliefs. Socrates typically begins by asking seemingly simple questions about moral concepts that everyone assumes they understand. In the Euthyphro, he asks what makes an action pious. When Euthyphro confidently replies that piety is what the gods love, Socrates demonstrates through careful questioning that this definition leads to absurd conclusions. If gods disagree about what to love, the same action could be simultaneously pious and impious. In the Meno, proposed definitions of virtue collapse under similar examination, revealing that we cannot even coherently explain what we claim to value most. This process of systematic questioning, elenctic, what scholars call the elenctic method, serves both destructive and constructive purposes. Like a physician purging poison from the body, Socrates tears down false opinions that masquerade as knowledge. Yet this destruction clears the ground for genuine understanding by removing obstacles to truth. The process resembles a midwife assisting with a difficult birth, painful but necessary for bringing forth new life. Socrates compares himself to a gadfly that stings the lazy horse of Athens into activity, forcing citizens to examine beliefs they had never questioned. The goal transcends winning arguments or humiliating opponents. Genuine Socratic dialogue involves collaborative inquiry, where both participants commit to following the argument wherever it leads, regardless of personal preferences or social conventions. We must follow the argument like a sacred path, Socrates insists, treating philosophical investigation as a form of divine service. The god compels him to examine himself and others, not from arrogance, but from recognition that the unexamined life lacks the coherence and purpose that make human existence meaningful. This commitment to questioning creates the foundation for something greater. If systematic inquiry can clear away false beliefs, we need a positive method for ascending to genuine knowledge of eternal truths. Dialectic represents the highest form of reasoning, transcending mathematics and all other forms of inquiry, to grasp what Plato calls the unhypothetical first principle, the form of the good itself. In Republic Book 7, he describes dialectic as the coping stone of the studies that alone destroys hypotheses and goes up to the first principle itself in order to confirm its conclusions. Unlike every other intellectual discipline, dialectic refuses to accept any starting point as given. Where mathematics assumes concepts like unity, equality, and geometric forms as self-evident foundations, dialectic questions what these concepts truly mean and how they relate to ultimate reality. This fundamental difference transforms the entire character of reasoning. Mathematicians work with diagrams and physical representations, taking their basic concepts as unquestionable starting points from which to derive conclusions. The dialectician proceeds through pure thought, examining the very foundations that others accept without question. Plato reveals that dialectic treats hypotheses, as stepping stones to take off from, so that it may soar beyond them to the first principle of everything. This method alone provides absolute rather than conditional knowledge, because it alone refuses to rest upon unexamined assumptions. The dialectical ascent follows logical connections between forms until the soul reaches the good that gives reality and truth to all others. Through rigorous questioning and logical analysis, the philosopher discovers how concepts like justice, beauty, and truth interconnect in a unified system grounded in the good as their ultimate source. This process demands the ability to give an account, to explain and defend one's beliefs through rational argument rather than appealing to authority, tradition, or popular opinion. The philosopher must demonstrate not merely what they believe, but why their beliefs necessarily follow from the nature of reality itself. Mastery of dialectic transforms the philosopher's entire understanding, enabling them to distinguish genuine knowledge from mere opinion in every domain of inquiry. The dialectical philosopher can examine the assumptions underlying politics, ethics, mathematics, and even dialectic itself. As Plato describes, such a philosopher is able to distinguish the form of the good from everything else and can defend it in argument against all challenges. This capacity represents the culmination of philosophical education, the point at which the soul achieves direct intellectual contact with absolute reality and can navigate confidently through the world of appearances, always guided by unchanging truth. Socrates presents himself not as a teacher who fills empty minds with knowledge, but as a midwife who helps souls give birth to truths they already possess. In the Theaetetus, he explains that my art of midwifery is, in general, like theirs. The only difference is that my patients are men, not women, and my concern is not with the body but with the soul that is in travail of birth. This extraordinary metaphor reveals something profound about the nature of philosophical inquiry and the relationship between teacher and student. The philosopher's role becomes not to provide ready-made answers, but to awaken the soul's innate capacity for truth through skillful questioning. This process mirrors physical birth in its intensity and difficulty. It can be painful and disorienting because it requires abandoning comfortable but false beliefs that have provided the illusion of security. Socrates acknowledges he is barren of wisdom himself, yet he possesses the crucial ability to help others bring forth many fine discoveries from within themselves. The midwife need not give birth herself to assist others in the process. This explains why genuine learning must be recollection, anamnesis. The immortal soul already knows eternal truths, but needs philosophical inquiry to remember what it knew before embodiment clouded its vision. The famous demonstration in the Meno proves this remarkable claim. Socrates helps an untutored slave boy discover complex geometric truths through questioning alone, never providing information from outside. The boy's soul already possessed this mathematical knowledge, requiring only the right questions to draw it forth. Socrates concludes that the soul, then, as being immortal, and having been born again many times, has seen all things that exist, and can recover this knowledge through proper inquiry. The dialectical method thus serves both epistemological and therapeutic functions. It heals the soul's ignorance whilst providing a reliable method for distinguishing truth from opinion. The philosopher midwife helps souls give birth to true beliefs that can withstand rational examination rather than false opinions that collapse under questioning. Socrates can determine whether the ideas his patients produce are mere phantoms and falsehoods or fertile and true. Because truth has a different quality from opinion, it possesses internal coherence, stands up to rigorous examination. This metaphor transforms our understanding of education and intellectual development. Knowledge cannot be deposited from outside like coins in a purse, but must emerge from within through the soul's own activity. The philosopher creates conditions for this emergence through persistent questioning that exposes contradictions and inconsistencies in our beliefs. This process of philosophical midwifery requires tremendous skill, knowing which questions to ask, when to push harder, when to allow reflection, how to guide without controlling the process of discovery. If dialectical inquiry can awaken the soul's capacity for truth in this way, we must ask what motivates this difficult philosophical journey and what drives the soul toward wisdom, despite the pain involved. Part 11. Love and Beauty, the Ladder of Ascent. Plato's profound insight in the Symposium transforms our understanding of love from mere sentiment into a revelation of human nature itself. Through Diotima's teaching, we discover that Eros exposes us as beings fundamentally defined by lack and desire, creatures who love precisely because we do not possess what we seek. Love, she explains, is always poor and far from tender and beautiful, yet driven by an insatiable desire for wisdom and the beautiful and good. This poverty is not weakness but recognition, the soul's acknowledgement of its own incompleteness and its natural orientation toward perfection. This understanding shatters romantic illusions. We do not love because we are fulfilled, but because we recognize our emptiness. The beloved becomes a mirror reflecting what we lack, what we might become. Eros emerges not as mere physical attraction or emotional attachment, but as philosophical longing, the soul's fundamental movement toward truth, beauty, and goodness. Our capacity for love demonstrates something magnificent about human nature. We are beings who can recognize value beyond ourselves and be moved by it. Yet this lack reveals something extraordinary. Love is not merely negative emptiness, but the soul's recognition of its kinship with divine reality. Diotima describes love as a daimon, an intermediary between mortal and divine that interprets and conveys messages from gods to humans and from humans to gods. Erotic desire bridges the temporal world of becoming and the eternal world of being. We love what we recognize as beautiful and good because the soul naturally seeks its proper object, the divine realm of perfect forms. This explains love's peculiar power. When we encounter beauty in a person, a sunset, or a mathematical proof, we experience recognition rather than mere preference. The soul responds to beauty because it remembers its true home. Love becomes the soul's response to value wherever it appears, whether in physical form, moral character, or intellectual insight. We are drawn to beauty because we belong to it. The lover always seeks not merely to possess, but to create beauty. Diotima reveals that all human beings are pregnant, both in body and in soul, and seek to give birth in beauty. Physical procreation achieves a kind of bodily immortality through children who carry forward our biological nature. But spiritual creation produces ideas, institutions, laws, and virtues that achieve higher immortality. Lovers want to create beautiful things together because creation expresses love's deepest impulse, the desire to make permanent what we recognize as valuable. This creative aspect reveals Eros as the soul's recognition of and desire for the good itself. We love what we perceive as beautiful and good because the soul naturally seeks its proper fulfillment. Even physical attraction involves recognition of beauty that points beyond itself toward perfect beauty. Plato's insight cuts to the heart. Love is wanting to possess the good forever, and this desire drives all human activity, from the simplest attraction to the highest philosophical contemplation. If love naturally seeks the beautiful and good, there must be a path by which the soul can ascend from lower to higher forms of beauty until it reaches beauty itself. The soul's first encounter with beauty begins where all human experience begins. The particular, the immediate, the physically present. Diotima tells us in the Symposium that he who would proceed aright in this matter should begin in youth to visit beautiful forms. And this beginning is not accidental, but necessary. When the soul encounters a beautiful body, something profound awakens, not mere physical desire, but the capacity for recognition itself. The soul sees proportion, harmony, symmetry, and responds with love. This response reveals that even physical attraction involves intellectual recognition, the mind's ability to perceive form and order that points beyond the merely material toward eternal patterns. What appears as simple physical attraction is actually the soul's first glimpse of beauty itself, manifested in physical form. The beautiful body becomes a window through which the soul perceives something greater than flesh and bone. The harmony of features, the grace of movement, the proportion of parts to whole, is. These create beauty because they participate in beauty. They embody in temporal, material form something of the eternal structure of reality itself. Physical love thus becomes the soul's first philosophical lesson, teaching it to recognize value, to perceive form, to respond to excellence. But the soul cannot remain satisfied with one beautiful body, for the mind's capacity for recognition leads inevitably to comparison, to generalization, to the discovery of patterns is less than #0. 5 is greater than Diotima, explains that the soul must realize that the beauty of one body is brother to the beauty of any other, and therefore he must become a lover of all beautiful bodies. This represents the mind's first philosophical insight, the recognition that universal forms manifest themselves in particular instances. The beauty that captivated the soul in one person exists equally in others, suggesting that beauty itself transcends any individual embodiment. This generalization from particular to universal marks the beginning of philosophical thinking about the nature of beauty itself. The soul begins to ask not merely who is beautiful, but what is beauty? The answer emerges through experience. I am an. Beauty is not the exclusive property of one body, but a quality that can be recognized across multiple instances because it participates in something beyond all particular manifestations. The lover of all beautiful bodies has taken the first step on the ladder of ascent, moving from attachment to the particular toward recognition of the universal. Yet physical beauty, however broadly recognized, remains limited, temporary, subject to change and decay. The soul's growing philosophical sophistication leads it to recognize that inner beauty surpasses outer beauty in both value and permanence. The progression moves naturally from loving beautiful bodies to loving beautiful souls, recognizing that the beauty of the mind is more honorable than the beauty of the outward form. This ascent from physical to spiritual beauty represents the soul's maturing understanding that true beauty involves harmony, order, and excellence of character, rather than mere physical appearance. The beauty of souls reveals itself in virtue, in wisdom, in the harmonious ordering of desires and rational capacities that creates moral excellence. A beautiful soul exhibits the same principles that create physical beauty: proportion, harmony, proper relationship between parts and whole, but applied to the realm of character and intellect. The philosopher, for Plato, is fundamentally a lover, someone driven not by cold intellectual curiosity, but by passionate desire for wisdom, truth, and the good itself. The very word philosopher means lover of wisdom, and this etymology reveals something profound about the nature of philosophical inquiry. Philosophy begins in wonder, that initial stirring of the soul when it encounters something beautiful or puzzling that awakens its deepest longings. Without this erotic drive, this passionate love of truth, philosophical education becomes mere technical training rather than the transformation of the soul that Plato envisioned. This erotic dimension of philosophy explains how the philosopher finds strength for the difficult ascent from the world of appearances to the world of forms. The journey toward truth involves genuine suffering, the pain of having one's comfortable beliefs challenged, the disorientation of discovering that what seemed solid and real is merely shadow and illusion. Yet the philosopher's love of truth provides the motivation to endure this painful process of education. In the Phaedrus, Plato describes how the philosopher's soul is reminded of true beauty when it encounters earthly beauty, experiencing a thrill of wonder that points toward eternal beauty itself. This passionate response to beauty becomes the driving force that enables the philosopher to overcome the ridicule of those still chained in the cave and the loneliness of pursuing unpopular insights. Philosophical love transcends the ordinary distinction between lover and beloved, because both participants in philosophical dialogue are transformed through their shared pursuit of truth. Unlike romantic love, where one person possesses what the other lacks, Philosophical love creates a community of inquiry where both parties become lovers of wisdom together. Socrates exemplifies this in his relationships with students, serving as midwife, helping them give birth to insights, whilst also learning from the process. The philosopher does not simply transfer knowledge to passive recipients, but creates conditions where truth can emerge through mutual questioning and shared wonder. The ultimate object of philosophical love is the form of the good, which alone can satisfy the soul's deepest longing for perfect beauty, complete knowledge, and absolute value. The philosopher who achieves this vision experiences what the Republic calls the most blessed sight, finding themselves nourished by contemplating truth in a way that provides the greatest possible happiness. This is not mere intellectual satisfaction, but the fulfillment of the soul's fundamental orientation toward what is most real and most valuable. The philosopher discovers that what they have always been seeking, consciously or unconsciously, is this perfect unity of truth, beauty, and goodness that the form of the good represents. Part 12. The Critique of Democracy. The Decline of States. Plato's analysis of political degeneration in the Republic reveals one of philosophy's most systematic accounts of how human societies inevitably decline from wisdom toward chaos. His cycle of constitutions traces the predictable descent from the ideal aristocracy through timocracy, oligarchy, democracy, and finally tyranny. Yet this political analysis masks a deeper psychological truth. Every form of government corresponds precisely to a type of human soul, and political corruption reflects spiritual corruption writ large. The aristocratic state, ruled by philosopher-kings, mirrors the aristocratic soul, ruled by reason. Here, wisdom governs both city and individual, with each part performing its proper function in harmonious order. The timocratic state emerges when guardians begin valuing honor over wisdom, corresponding to souls where spirited ambition overthrows rational deliberation. The oligarchic state follows when honor lovers begin pursuing wealth over honor, reflecting souls where appetite for material gain conquers noble aspiration. Democracy arises when the wealthy lose control to the masses, seeking freedom over order, mirroring souls where chaotic desires overwhelm all restraint. Finally, tyranny emerges from democratic chaos, embodying souls completely enslaved to their basest appetites. This degeneration follows an inexorable logic. Each transition occurs when the ruling principle abandons its proper object and becomes corrupted by lower aims. Plato observes that any constitution is destroyed when the rulers for whom it is established are not the ones who rule. When philosopher-kings cease philosophizing, when guardians seek personal glory, when producers abandon productive work for political power, the entire structure collapses toward the next stage of decline. Each successive form represents the ascendancy of a lower part of the soul over a higher part, creating increasing disorder and injustice. The inevitability of this decline reveals something profound about the nature of temporal existence. Even the ideal state cannot permanently maintain the perfect balance required for justice. The golden cord of the guardian's education and communistic lifestyle will eventually weaken over generations. Plato provides a complex mathematical formula for calculating when this decline begins, suggesting that even perfect institutions remain subject to the universal principle of change and decay that governs everything in the world of becoming. Each successive constitution proves worse than its predecessor because it represents a further departure from reason's rule toward appetite's tyranny. Timocracy at least preserves honor and courage. Oligarchy maintains productive work and wealth creation. Democracy values freedom and equality. But tyranny values nothing except the tyrant's immediate gratification, representing the complete triumph of ignorance over wisdom. Plato's ranking of constitutions from best to worst corresponds exactly to his ranking of soul types, from happiest to most miserable, revealing that political analysis ultimately concerns the human condition itself. The democratic person emerges as Plato's most complex psychological portrait, MRC, someone who treats all desires and pleasures as equally valid, sampling every lifestyle and appetite without discrimination. In Republic Book 8, Plato describes the democratic man as living from day to day, indulging the appetite of the day and thinking, all pleasures are equal and must be equally honored. This creates a fundamentally chaotic soul, where reason has no authority to distinguish between noble and base desires, healthy and unhealthy pleasures, or worthwhile and worthless pursuits. Democratic equality, when applied to the soul's internal organization, destroys the hierarchy necessary for psychological health. What appears as freedom reveals itself as a particularly insidious form of slavery. Slavery to whatever desire happens to be strongest at the moment. The democratic soul lacks the internal structure necessary for genuine self-governance. The democratic person mistakes variety for freedom and license for genuine liberty, never developing the rational self-control that would allow them to choose their desires rather than being chosen by them. Plato observes that the democratic soul doesn't admit true reasoning about which pleasures are better or worse, but treats all desires as having equal claims. Without rational hierarchy, the soul becomes a battlefield of competing impulses. This psychological disorder manifests socially as the breakdown of all natural hierarchies and forms of authority. Students show no respect for teachers. Children disobey parents. Slaves act like masters, and citizens ignore laws whenever convenient. Plato writes that the teacher fears and flatters his students, and the students despise their teachers, whilst the old descend to the level of the young and are full of pleasantry and gaiety, imitating the young because they don't want to be thought disagreeable and authoritarian. Social chaos mirrors the psychological chaos of the democratic soul. This condition, whilst appearing to offer maximum freedom and happiness, actually prepares the way for tyranny by creating souls incapable of rational self-governance. The democratic person's inability to distinguish between worthy and unworthy desires makes them vulnerable to demagogues who promise simple solutions to complex problems. Plato's insight proves prophetic. Excessive freedom seems only to pass into excessive slavery. Democracy creates the psychological and social chaos that generates the conditions for its own destruction. Democracy's greatest weakness lies not in its ideals, but in its inevitable trajectory toward chaos and despotism. Plato understood that excessive freedom, when untempered by wisdom or virtue, transforms into its opposite. The democratic city becomes, in his memorable phrase, drunk on the unmixed wine of freedom, celebrating liberty as an absolute good, whilst losing any capacity for discrimination or judgment. Citizens demand the right to do whatever they please, rejecting all authority, all expertise, all claims to superior knowledge or virtue. This intoxication with freedom creates the perfect conditions for tyranny's emergence. When every voice claims equal worth, when every desire demands satisfaction, when all distinctions between wisdom and ignorance collapse, the result is not harmony, but paralysis. The democratic state fractures into competing factions, each pursuing its own interests without regard for the common good. Citizens grow frustrated with endless debates, conflicting policies, and the apparent inability of democratic institutions to provide clear direction or immediate solutions. Into this chaos, steps the future tyrant, initially appearing as the people's champion. He promises simple answers to complex problems, immediate gratification instead of difficult choices. Most crucially, he positions himself as the defender of ordinary citizens against wealthy elites, corrupt politicians, and foreign enemies. The masses, overwhelmed by democracy's complexity and exhausted by its conflicts, eagerly embrace this strongman who claims to embody their will and protect their interests. Plato's analysis reveals the tyrant's method with chilling precision. The aspiring despot must always be stirring up some war or other in order that the people may require a leader. He creates perpetual crisis, manufacturing enemies both internal and external, ensuring that citizens remain dependent on his protection. What begins as popular leadership gradually transforms into absolute power as the tyrant eliminates opposition, silences critics, and concentrates authority in his own hands. The transformation from champion to oppressor follows an inexorable logic. The tyrant, having gained power through appeals to popular appetite rather than reason, becomes enslaved to those same appetites. He cannot govern through wisdom or virtue because he has rejected both as constraints on his will. Instead, he rules through fear, manipulation, and the constant satisfaction of base desires. Former allies become threats to be eliminated. Supporters become potential rivals to be watched. This reveals tyranny's deepest tragedy. It represents the complete victory of appetite over reason, in both individual, soul, and state. The tyrant embodies what Plato calls erotic love in its most destructive form. Not the philosophical eros that draws the soul toward truth and beauty, but lawless appetite that recognizes no boundaries, no limits, no higher purposes. As Plato describes in Republic Book 9, the tyrant is ruled by a master passion that takes everything else as its bodyguard, transforming every human relationship into an instrument of selfish gratification. The tyrant becomes the most miserable of all human beings, precisely because he achieves what appears to be ultimate success. He possesses absolute power, yet lives in constant fear of assassination, betrayal, and revolt. He can trust no one because he has destroyed the very foundations of trust through his rise to power. Part 13. The Afterlife and Cosmic Justice. The Myth of Justice faces a fundamental challenge that threatens to undermine Plato's entire philosophical project. If the just life is truly the happiest life, if virtue is intrinsically valuable rather than merely instrumentally useful, then why do we witness the prosperity of tyrants and the suffering of philosophers? The apparent success of unjust people and the persecution of the virtuous creates what Plato recognizes as philosophy's most dangerous crisis. Unless virtue is ultimately rewarded and vice punished, the rational person might conclude that justice is merely a convenient fiction imposed by the weak upon the strong. Plato's response reveals the breathtaking scope of his vision. The soul, he argues in Republic Book X, is immortal and has been born many times, carrying the consequences of its choices across multiple existences. This isn't mere wishful thinking, but follows necessarily from his understanding of the soul's nature. We mustn't think that the soul, in its truest nature, is full of multicolored variety and unlikeness and conflict with itself. Rather, the soul is essentially rational, oriented toward the good, and therefore indestructible. The immortal soul faces consequences for its choices across lifetimes, ensuring that virtue receives its due reward, even when earthly justice fails. This cosmic perspective transforms every moral choice into an investment in eternity. The philosopher, who suffers for pursuing truth, the just person persecuted for doing right. They are actually securing their soul's eternal welfare. As Socrates argues in the Phaedo, the soul that has pursued philosophy in the right way prepares itself for ultimate happiness, whilst the soul that has indulged in bodily pleasures carries its disorder into the afterlife. These aren't arbitrary divine punishments, but natural consequences of the soul's condition. Just souls, harmonized by reason and virtue, are prepared for happiness. Unjust souls, torn by competing desires and ignorance, carry their chaos with them. The necessity of cosmic justice emerges from the very structure of reality. If the good truly governs the universe, if rational order underlies all existence, then the soul's choices align it either with this eternal order or with the chaotic realm of appetite and ignorance. Every decision about justice, virtue, and wisdom reverberates across the soul's entire existence. Republic Book X makes this explicit. The soul is immortal, and we must always take care of it, not only for the time we call life, but for all time. This vision provides ultimate meaning for the philosophical life by connecting the pursuit of wisdom to the eternal order of reality itself. The philosopher's commitment to truth isn't merely personal preference, but participation in the cosmic structure governed by the good. Understanding how souls choose their destinies across multiple lifetimes becomes essential for grasping why virtue matters eternally. The soul's journey through death reveals the deepest paradox of cosmic justice. In the myth of Plato presents us with souls standing before the fates, choosing their next lives from countless patterns spread before them. Here lies the puzzle that haunts every consideration of ultimate responsibility. If we truly choose our destinies, how can we be held accountable for circumstances that seem beyond our control? The prophet's declaration echoes across the cosmic meadow. Responsibility lies with the chooser. The god has none. Yet the very act of choosing appears constrained by factors no individual soul commands. Witnesses the lottery that determines the order of selection, watching as some souls must choose first from the full array, whilst others wait until only remnants remain. The soul granted first choice seizes immediately upon the life of a tyrant, drawn by the glittering promise of absolute power. This soul had lived virtuously in its previous existence, but virtue maintained through habit rather than philosophical understanding. When confronted with genuine choice, stripped of the social constraints that had previously guided its behavior, it reveals its true character, the belief that external goods constitute genuine happiness. The cosmic justice emerges not in the fairness of selection order, but in how choice reflects the soul's accumulated wisdom. Odysseus's soul, arriving last after all others have chosen, must search long among the scattered remnants of available lives. By is less than #0, 5 is greater than, yet this soul, cured of ambition by memory of its former sufferings, seeks only the life of an ordinary citizen. Having learned through experience that glory and adventure bring more pain than joy, it chooses what others had rejected as worthless. The soul that understands the true nature of good requires no abundance of options. It recognizes genuine value even in what appears least attractive. This reveals the profound truth beneath the apparent paradox. Choice is free but never arbitrary. It expresses the soul's developed understanding of reality itself. Souls who have practiced philosophy, who have trained themselves to distinguish appearance from truth, choose wisely regardless of their circumstances. They understand that wisdom, justice, courage, and moderation constitute genuine goods that no external force can destroy. Meanwhile, souls corrupted by false beliefs about what makes life worth living will choose badly even when presented with the most attractive alternatives. Most souls, Plato observes, make their choices according to the habits of their former lives, rather than through rational deliberation. They have never examined whether their desires align with genuine good or mere appearance. The wealthy soul seeks wealth again. The powerful soul grasps for power. The famous soul cannot imagine happiness without recognition. Each perpetuates the very patterns that created their suffering, mistaking familiar desires for authentic choice. Between lives, cosmic justice operates through education rather than mere retribution. Just souls ascend to heaven, where they contemplate pure truth and beauty for 1,000 years, their understanding deepened by direct contact with reality itself. Unjust souls descend into the earth's depths, undergoing purification that burns away false beliefs and disordered desires. These are not arbitrary rewards and punishments, but necessary preparations for better choosing. The soul cannot select wisely what it does not understand, cannot choose good it has never encountered. The 1,000-year cycles ensure that every soul eventually gains the experience necessary for genuine wisdom. The cosmic order operates according to rational necessity. The fates do not spin the threads of human destiny according to arbitrary divine whim, but according to mathematical harmony and moral law. In Eyre's extraordinary vision from the Republic, Plato presents the spindle of necessity, with its 8 whirls representing the celestial spheres, each producing a distinct musical note. Together, these notes create what Plato calls one harmony, a unified cosmic song that emerges from the mathematical structure of reality itself. This is not chaos masquerading as order, nor divine caprice disguised as justice. The cosmos operates according to comprehensible laws where individual destinies unfold within a rational framework that ensures ultimate justice. Individual choice operates meaningfully within this larger cosmic structure. The 3 fates, Clotho, who spins the thread of life, Lachesis, who measures its length, and Atropos, who cuts it at the appointed time, work together to ensure that each soul receives precisely the destiny it has chosen and earned through its character and actions. What each soul chose in accordance with its fundamental nature becomes its destiny, but this destiny unfolds according to cosmic laws that guarantee justice across the span of existence. Personal responsibility gains profound meaning precisely because our choices participate in this larger rational order, rather than occurring in a universe of mere accident or arbitrary punishment. The philosopher who has oriented their soul toward eternal truth participates directly in this cosmic order and achieves a form of immortality through union with what is permanent and rational. Philosophical contemplation does not merely observe the mathematical and moral structure of reality from the outside. It connects the individual soul to this structure, making the philosopher a participant in, rather than victim of cosmic necessity. Through the disciplined pursuit of wisdom, the philosopher becomes what Plato describes as much like God as possible, not through mystical absorption but through rational understanding that aligns the soul with the eternal principles governing all existence. This mythical vision provides hope and ultimate meaning for the philosophical life, by revealing that the pursuit of wisdom connects us to the fundamental structure of reality itself and ensures our participation in eternal truth. The myth of Eyre serves not as literal cosmological description, but as inspiring vision that motivates the choice of philosophy over other ways of life. As the Republic concludes, "If we are persuaded by me, we'll believe that the soul is immortal and able to endure every evil and every good, and will always hold to the upward path practicing justice with wisdom. This cosmic perspective reveals how all aspects of Plato's philosophy form a unified system centered on the good. Part 14. The unity of Plato's vision. The form of the good. At the summit of Plato's metaphysical hierarchy stands the form of the good, not merely another form amongst equals, but the source from which all other forms derive their reality and truth. Just as the sun illuminates the visible world and enables sight, whilst remaining distinct from what it reveals, the good gives being and intelligibility to the entire realm of forms, whilst transcending them in power and dignity. In the Republic's most profound metaphysical declaration, Plato announces that the good is not being, but superior to it in rank and power, being the cause of knowledge and truth. This extraordinary claim transforms the good from a moral concept into the ultimate explanation for existence itself, NTA, the final answer to why there is something rather than nothing, why anything can be known, and why knowledge has value. The dependence of all knowledge upon the good reveals itself when we examine any genuine understanding. Mathematical truths possess their eternal certainty because mathematical objects participate in the good's perfection. Moral knowledge becomes possible only because virtues derive their worth from reflecting the good's nature. Even our grasp of justice, beauty, or truth depends entirely upon their relationship to the good that makes them valuable and real. Without the good as their source, the forms themselves would collapse into mere abstractions, possessing neither being nor the power to make anything else intelligible. As Plato observes, in the knowable realm, the form of the good is the last thing to be seen, and it is reached only with difficulty. Yet once glimpsed, it illuminates everything else we thought we understood. The good's transcendence creates a profound paradox that reveals its unique metaphysical status. It cannot exist in the ordinary sense, because it is the condition that makes existence possible for everything else. The good is simultaneously the most real thing, since all reality depends upon it, and beyond reality, transcending every category that applies to dependent beings. This paradox reflects the good's role as what Plato calls beyond being in dignity and power, whilst remaining responsible for all that is right and beautiful in everything. The good doesn't compete with other entities for space in reality, but occupies the impossible position of being the source of the very possibility of being. Every genuine philosophical inquiry ultimately ascends toward the good as its final destination and foundation. The dialectical method aims precisely at grasping the good as the unhypothetical first principle from which all demonstration proceeds. The philosopher's vision of the good transforms their understanding of everything else because they now see how all reality and knowledge flow from this single source. The good gives truth to the things known and the power of knowing to the knower, making philosophical education not merely the acquisition of information, but the soul's journey toward the ultimate source of all value and reality. Once the philosopher glimpses the good, they cannot remain content with shadows and reflections, but must understand how this supreme principle governs not only what exists and what can be known, but what ought to be done in ethics and politics. Plato's ethics and politics rest on a revolutionary claim. All virtue is ultimately knowledge of good and evil, with the four cardinal virtues representing different aspects of the soul's proper relationship to the good. Rather than separate moral qualities, wisdom becomes knowledge of the good itself, the direct apprehension of ultimate value that makes all other knowledge possible. Courage emerges as the soul's unwavering commitment to the good. Despite obstacles, pain, or social pressure, temperance reveals itself as the ordering of desires according to the good, rather than according to pleasure or immediate satisfaction. Justice appears as the harmony that results when all parts of the soul are properly oriented toward the good as their common center. This insight transforms our understanding of moral education. When Plato declares that virtue is knowledge, he means that all moral development aims at turning the soul toward the good as the source of all value. The person who truly knows what is good cannot act badly, not because knowledge constrains choice, but because genuine knowledge of the good reveals it as the most desirable reality. Moral failure stems from ignorance, from mistaking shadows for reality, pleasures for genuine goods, popular opinion for truth. Political justice mirrors individual justice, precisely because both depend on proper hierarchy, oriented toward the good rather than toward pleasure, power, or popular opinion. The ideal state works because its three classes correspond to the soul's three parts, all organized according to their relationship to wisdom and the good. The guardians embody the soul's rational element, the auxiliaries, its spirited element, the producers, its appetitive element. Just as the just soul achieves harmony when reason rules over spirit and appetite, the just state achieves harmony when philosophers rule over warriors and workers. This parallel between the just soul and the just state reflects the cosmic order where the good governs all reality. Political problems are fundamentally spiritual problems, about the soul's orientation toward ultimate value. Democracy fails not because people lack intelligence, but because democratic decisions emerge from souls oriented toward pleasure, comfort, and immediate satisfaction rather than toward the good. The democratic soul, like the democratic state, lacks the hierarchical organization necessary for genuine flourishing. The Philosopher-King can rule wisely only because knowledge of the good provides an absolute standard for moral and political decisions that transcends personal preference, cultural convention, and popular opinion. Without this knowledge, even well-intentioned rulers make decisions based on incomplete understanding of what truly benefits human beings. In Republic Book 7, Plato argues that anyone who is to act sensibly in private or public must see the form of the good. Political authority should be based on wisdom about ultimate reality rather than power, wealth, or democratic consent. Education, love, and dialectical reasoning emerge as unified methods for turning the soul toward the good as the ultimate object of human desire and knowledge. The educational curriculum prepares the soul to grasp the good through mathematics, music, and philosophy. Philosophical eros drives the soul's ascent toward the good as the most beautiful reality. Dialectical method enables the soul to reach the good as the unhypothetical first principle that grounds all knowledge and existence. These approaches unite because they all aim at the same transformation, orienting human life toward its proper end in the good itself. The philosophical life represents the highest human possibility precisely because it involves direct contemplation of the good itself, which stands as the most real and valuable object of knowledge. This contemplation provides the greatest happiness because it satisfies the soul's deepest nature and connects us to what is most real and valuable in existence. In the Republic's 9th book, Plato demonstrates that the pleasure connected with the contemplation of reality is the truest pleasure, and that the philosopher experiences happiness qualitatively different from and superior to all other forms of satisfaction. The philosopher's joy emerges not from fleeting bodily pleasures or even honor amongst men, but from contact with eternal truth itself. This contemplation of the good provides genuine immortality because it connects the soul to what is eternal and unchanging, allowing the philosopher to participate in the divine nature through knowledge and virtue. The soul that has oriented itself toward the good becomes like what it contemplates. Eternal, rational, and good. In the Phaedo, Socrates argues that the soul that has pursued philosophy in the right way becomes pure and divine, and achieves genuine immortality through its kinship with eternal truth. The philosopher's soul, having spent its earthly life turning away from shadows toward the light of reality, maintains this orientation beyond death. The cosmic order ensures that souls who orient themselves toward the good participate in eternal truth and achieve the best possible destiny across multiple lifetimes. The myth of reveals that philosophical souls choose wisely in the afterlife because they understand the true nature of good and evil, whilst unphilosophical souls choose badly because they mistake appearance for reality. Cosmic justice rewards those who pursue wisdom and virtue, whilst ensuring that ignorance and vice ultimately lead to misery and purification. The philosopher, who has learned to see beyond appearances, makes choices rooted in understanding, rather than mere desire. Plato's entire philosophy can be understood as an extended argument that reality, knowledge, virtue, and happiness all depend on the soul's relationship to the transcendent good that gives meaning to everything else. The theory of forms, the tripartite soul, the ideal state, the Philosopher-King, the critique of democracy, and the vision of cosmic justice all flow from the central insight about the good as the source of all truth and value. The Republic's final vision celebrates the soul that always holds to the upward path, practicing justice with wisdom, and thereby achieves the greatest possible human fulfillment. This unified vision of reality, knowledge, virtue, and destiny continues to challenge and inspire anyone seeking to understand the deepest questions of human existence. Part 15. Conclusion. Plato achieved something unprecedented in the history of human thought. He created the first systematic philosophy in Western civilization by demonstrating how all fundamental questions receive unified answers when understood in relation to the form of the good as ultimate reality. What is real? The eternal forms that give meaning to temporal existence. How can we know? Through the soul's ascent from opinion to knowledge via dialectical reasoning. How should we live? By pursuing virtue and wisdom in alignment with our soul's immortal nature. How should society be organized? According to justice, with philosopher-kings guided by knowledge of the good. His revolutionary insight that the physical world points beyond itself to eternal forms established the basic framework for all subsequent philosophy from medieval Christian thought. Through modern idealism to contemporary debates about consciousness and reality, metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, politics, education, and human destiny emerge as interconnected aspects of a single vision centered on the transformative power of philosophical understanding. The cave allegory remains the most powerful image in philosophy because it captures the universal human condition with startling clarity. We mistake appearances for reality, confuse opinion with knowledge, and resist the painful but liberating journey toward truth that defines the philosophical life. This allegory continues to resonate in contemporary discussions about media manipulation, ideological echo chambers, and the difficulty of distinguishing truth from opinion in democratic societies. The allegory's insights about education, enlightenment, and the philosopher's responsibility to return and help others escape ignorance remain as relevant today as they were in ancient Athens. Every time we question received wisdom, challenge popular assumptions, or struggle to see beyond surface appearances, we reenact the prisoner's journey from darkness to light. Plato's vision of the philosopher-king and the ideal state continues to challenge us with the radical idea that political authority should be based on wisdom and virtue rather than power, wealth, or popular opinion. This raises enduring questions that every democracy must confront. What is the relationship between knowledge and political participation? Can expertise coexist with equality? Should truth trump consensus? Contemporary debates about technocracy, populism, and the role of experts in democratic decision-making represent modern versions of Plato's fundamental challenge to democratic assumptions about political equality. His critique forces us to examine whether democratic societies can pursue truth and justice when political decisions are made by those who may lack the wisdom to govern well. Plato's fundamental question remains as urgent as ever. Will we remain prisoners in the cave of appearances, or will we turn toward the light of truth and dedicate our lives to the pursuit of wisdom, justice, and the good that gives meaning to human existence? His vision of the examined life, the ascent to truth through education and love, and the soul's immortal destiny provides a compelling alternative to materialistic and relativistic worldviews. His insight that the unexamined life is not worth living stands as a permanent challenge to anyone seeking authentic human fulfillment. 24 centuries later, Plato's philosophy continues to offer the most comprehensive and inspiring vision of what it means to be human and what makes life worth living. A vision that calls us beyond the shadows toward the eternal light of truth.